Chapter 387. Everyone was shocked. This minister is very direct. He went straight to the point. Has anyone led an army like this since ancient times? They saw the minister flipping through a small booklet in his hand. The bodyguard standing next to him squinted his eyes and almost laughed out loud. The handwriting on this booklet looked like a turtle's crawl. It was very ugly. It was General Wu Kuan-yun's handwriting. This was exactly what Chu Yang had forced Wu Kuan-yun to write about his understanding of the various generals and their respective characteristics during the 2 hours he had spent on world-defying stage heavens. These people were Wu Kuan-yun's old subordinates. So, he obviously knew their strengths like the back of his hand. Chu Yang had to rely on this to make arrangements for the generals. This battle wouldn't be difficult to fight against the exhausted soldiers outside the city. Tai Butian's intention was to let Chu Yang use this battle to train his troops. Wu Shi! Chu Yang frowned and said. M.O. General is here! Wu Yi stood up straight with a swoosh. He looked like a tough soldier, but his serious stuttering had greatly reduced his image. The generals burst into laughter. Chu Yang was dumbfounded. He raised his head and said, "Are you the deputy commander?" M.O. Wu Yi's mouth was foaming. Wu Kuan-yun hurriedly translated. Reporting to the Supreme Commander, he wanted to say, "I am." Oh. Chu Yang looked at the roaring laughter below. Suddenly, his face changed. He slammed the table. "What are you laughing at?" The generals were stunned. "What are you laughing at? It's funny, isn't it?" Chu Yang looked at them fiercely. "Do you think it's funny that he stutters and you don't stutter? Are you laughing at your own brother? Huh! You guys are really united! Is stuttering funny? Speak!" He slammed the table heavily. There was complete silence. "Wu Yi! Yes! I order you to immediately lead 50,000 elite soldiers out of the city to challenge. Pay attention! After the battle, you don't need to cause a lot of casualties. You only need to mobilize the enemy's troops. Then, you immediately lead the troops back. Understood." Wu Yi straightened his chest. "Go." "Yes." Wu Yi received the order and strode away. Then, Chu Yang called out the names of several generals. Basically, every 2 hours, 50,000 soldiers would go out of the city to harass them. Yes, it was harassment. Long Ao was in for a tragedy. He was now secretly letting the army clean up the collapsed mountain. As long as they could make a slope that could allow horses to gallop up, they would be able to leave this place. Of course, this work was deliberately concealed and was extremely secretive. Moreover, it looked like it was about to be completed. At this time, the city gate suddenly opened with a sound. Following that, a group of people surged out like a tide. The leading general shouted under the moonlight. Long! Ao! You! Do you dare to fight with me? Long Ao was infuriated. What a bastard, coming up to challenge at such a critical juncture, and even coming up with an ending. However, he had no choice but to fight, because the other party was already charging over. In case they rushed into the camp, he wasn't afraid of disturbing the army. But he was afraid that the other party would find out about his movements. Even if one of them managed to escape, Wu Kuan-yun would be prepared. Then, his army would be annihilated. Therefore, Long Ao had no choice but to hurriedly send troops to resist. Who would have thought that this stuttering general would throw out a sentence after a round of fighting? Ming! 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 Tomorrow. He hadn't even finished speaking when his shadow disappeared. Long Ao smashed his cup in the commander's tent. Another 2 hours passed, and another wave came. This wave broke through the vanguard of Great Gao's army with a loud bang. They immediately retreated after killing and setting fire. Another 2 hours passed, and another wave came. Long Ao flew into a rage. He was at his wits' end. The night passed in such a state of high tension. Dawn broke. Long Ao was pacing back and forth in the commander's tent. Suddenly, a loud noise came from outside. It seemed that soldiers were causing trouble. The quartermaster came to report. Supreme Commander. We don't have any food. No food? Long Ao's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Didn't we tell them to divide the rations for 1 day into 3 days? Where are we going to get food at this time? But this is a high-intensity battle. In addition, we haven't slept all night, the soldiers are. The quartermaster was also helpless. They had fallen into this situation. All the military supplies were in the rear. He was the quartermaster. So, he didn't have anything in his hands. The only provisions they had after they had been intercepted here were the 3 days' rations that the soldiers had carried with them. The provisions weren't distributed under a unified jurisdiction. They were all in the hands of the soldiers. So, who could bear it if they got hungry? 5 days had already passed. So, what else could be left? The noise outside was getting louder and louder. They won't let us eat. How can we fight if we don't let us eat? That's right. Do you want to win the battle on an empty stomach? We want to eat. This group of soldiers was a rough bunch. Only a few of them were literate. In other words, those who could recognize their own names were highly educated people in the army. They had always been like this. Don't have food? Look for an official. We don't care where this is or how critical the situation is. Anyway, we can't go hungry. Long Ao frowned. He lifted the curtain and rushed out in big strides. What are you shouting about? There was a moment of silence. Then someone shouted, Marshal! We want to eat. Was someone taking the lead? Everyone's courage grew. They shouted together, Marshal, we want to eat. Long Ao's cheeks twitched. He said angrily, No food? If you don't have food, you won't eat horse meat? There are so many dead horses piled up there. Aren't those eaten? The soldiers cheered. Eat horse meat, eat horse meat. They left one after another. Then, there was another conflict at the dead warhorses. Which cavalry didn't treat their warhorses as their lives? When their warhorses died, they couldn't be more sad. How could they allow others to eat their warhorses? Of course, they refused this group of hungry soldiers. So, the conflict arose. The cavalrymen who were guarding the warhorses' corpses were beaten down. Then, the soldiers started to argue again. Some complained that they were given less. Some complained that others were given more. It was noisy. In the end, the quartermaster came forward. He gathered the dead warhorses together and distributed them uniformly. No one had more, and no one had less. Only then was the crisis temporarily averted. However, Long Ao had already seen the signs of destruction. Today, we can eat dead horses. Tomorrow, we can starve for half a meal. But the day after tomorrow, we will have to kill live horses. How can a cavalry be called a cavalry without a horse? Wu Kuan-yin appeared while Long Ao was in a terrible fix. General Wu was shouldering a heavy responsibility this time. Minister Chu had sent him to persuade Long Ao to surrender. Everyone could guess that Wu Kuan-yin would persuade Long Ao to surrender given his temperament. Will he persuade Long Ao to surrender? This was simply impossible. Because Minister Chu didn't intend to accept Long Ao's surrender. Because Wu Kuan-yin's first words angered Long Ao. Long Ao, fuck your mother. I'm here to persuade you to surrender. Long Ao was so angry that he fainted. Originally, he had thought that he might as well agree for the time being if Wu Kuan-yin came to persuade him to surrender. Then, he would go to the battlefield and attack Prime Minister Diwu in passing. This would be considered as atonement for his crime. However, the other party had sent Wu Kuan-yin to persuade him to surrender. Is this persuasion? This is a declaration of war, okay. I would rather die than surrender. Long Ao spurred his horse out of the formation. He roared with anger. He waited until he got closer. Then, he lowered his voice and said, Wu Kuan-yin, you fucking persuade me to surrender, but you don't know how to persuade me. His voice was very low. Only Wu Kuan-yin could hear him. Long Ao's meaning was, you have come to persuade me to surrender. But you can't have this attitude. How can I agree with your attitude? You have to promise me a high position and generous salary. You have to show me your will. Then, I will pretend to consider it. You will persuade me again and again. Then, I will surrender. Moreover, you have to give me some face in front of my subordinates, in front of the two armies. You can't just shout like a dog, and I will surrender. How can there be such a thing? Wu Kuan-yin didn't buy it. He tilted his ear and asked loudly, What did you say? Speak louder! Long Ao almost died from anger. He gritted his teeth and said, Wu Kuan-yin, you have to show some will to persuade me to surrender, right? Wu Kuan-yin suddenly realized. He lowered his voice and said, You mean one? Long Ao was delighted. It seems there's hope, he said in a low voice. I mean, you put forward some conditions. One. As if. Wu Kuan-yin winked at him. Long Ao's voice became even lower. As if, you will make me a great general. Then, I will be promoted to an official position. Then, how will my subordinates be arranged? How will they be rewarded? You have surrendered. And you still want to be a great general? Wu Kuan-yin shouted. His eyes were wide open in astonishment. His voice was very loud. So many people heard him. Long Ao was so anxious that his face started to sweat. My dear father, can't you be a little bit quieter? Fuck! Wu Kuan-yin suddenly shouted. Even if you are in a hurry to surrender, you won't call me father anymore, right? Long Ao stared at him. Why are you staring at me? Tell me, did you just call me father? Isn't that right? Wu Kuan-yin was full of vigor as he shouted loudly. Wu Kuan-yin! Long Ao roared. His face turned red, and the corners of his eyes almost cracked. What are you shouting for? Wu Kuan-yin's voice became louder. What? You called me your father just now. You still dare to deny it. Long Ao, do you dare to swear to the heavens? Swear in the name of your ancestors that you didn't call me father. Swear! Swear! Swear that you didn't call me father! Send! Send! Long Ao trembled with anger. He glared at Wu Kuan-yin. But he didn't dare to swear. Filial piety was very important in this era. Long Ao was already an old man. Although he didn't mean it that way, he didn't dare to swear on his ancestors. Fuck, you still want to be a great general. You still want to be promoted. You still want to be rewarded. Fuck! Wu Kuan-yin's voice was like thunder. I tell you, Long Ao, it's useless to call me father. Kneel down if you surrender. If you don't surrender, I will kill you. What? You want to talk about conditions with us? You must be crazy. Chapter 388. Wu Kuan-yin! You! Long Ao pointed his finger at Wu Kuan-yin in grief and indignation as he cried out. However, he saw Wu Kuan-yin's malicious mockery. He never intended to persuade me to surrender. He was playing with me. Long Ao almost collapsed when this thought arose in his mind. I've always been proud of my intelligence. But I've been played so miserably. The enemy troops at the front and the army at the rear burst into loud boos at the same time. This made Long Ao want to draw his sword and cut his own throat to apologize to the world. Humiliation. Extraordinary humiliation. Long Ao had always been proud and arrogant. Moreover, he had never lost a battle. So, when had he ever suffered such humiliation? Moreover, it was a heavy blow. His troops were already at the end of their rope. The only thing that could keep them afloat was the prestige that he had built up over the years as the main commander. But the prestige that I've painstakingly built up over the years has been destroyed by the enemy's persuasion. It's over. Long Ao was so angry that he almost couldn't sit still on the horse's back. His vision turned black, and his heart turned disheartened. He almost subconsciously turned his horse around and galloped back to his army. So, this is what the generals who have been defeated and humiliated by me in the past were thinking in their hearts. Long Ao suddenly had this thought at this time. Wu Kuan-yun didn't chase after him. He just urged his horse to stand still. He looked at Long Ao with a mocking smile on his face. He thought, it seems that the method taught by King of Hell Chu is really useful. Look at this guy. He's so angry that he's half dead. It's so cool. Long Ao galloped back to his army. He saw a lot of doubts, and disdain in their eyes. The army was speechless as they looked at him. He had deliberately lowered his voice when he was speaking in front of the army. It was clear that he was pleading. But the enemy didn't lower his voice. The enemy said that Long Ao had called him father. And General Long didn't refute. The enemy forced him to swear. And he only spat out a mouthful of blood. He didn't swear. What does this mean? This means that General Long is begging for mercy. He's begging for good treatment after surrendering. He's even bowing and calling him father. But he's being ruthlessly humiliated. Is this really our Marshal Long? Long Ao felt as if his heart had been struck by a heavy blow, as he looked at the silent, doubtful eyes of the crowd. He felt as if a knife had been twisted in his heart. He wanted to say something, but he saw stars in front of his eyes. He opened his mouth, and spat out a big mouthful of blood. Suddenly, he felt disheartened, and a sense of death welled up in his heart. He turned his horse's head, and suddenly shouted, Wu Kuan-yun! When I was alive, I couldn't eat your flesh, but when I die, I will chase your soul. I, Long Ao, will never coexist with you in this world. As he roared, blood gushed out of his mouth. Suddenly, he stretched out his hand, and pulled out his long sword. He then shouted angrily, Wu Kuan-yun, wait for me. Tonight my ghost will come to find you. He brandished his long sword, and unexpectedly killed himself on the horse's back. His voice was shrill, as if a malicious spirit from hell had suddenly rushed out, howling madly with endless hatred, causing everyone who heard it to feel their hair stand on end. He was dead, and his blood was gushing out, but his body didn't collapse. His eyes were still glaring angrily at Wu Kuan-yun. His eyes were as deep as a dead fish's, and seemed to be connected to the netherworld. This generation's famous general had finally chosen to commit suicide. Marshal! The bodyguard burst into tears. Marshal! Thousands of people shouted together. They knelt down, and wept bitterly. Wu Kuan-yun on the opposite side shuddered. Then, he suddenly burst into laughter. Fuck, I have killed more than 10 million people in my life. You're not the only one who wants to settle accounts with me for revenge. Come to find me tonight? Then, you'll have to line up first. Fuck, you're already dead, but you're still scaring people. Then, he waved his arms and shouted, Long Ao is dead. You, when are you going to surrender? He wanted to say, you and the others. But he felt that he couldn't say it out loud. So, he had no choice but to say, you and the others. On the city wall, a black robe was fluttering in the wind. Behind the black mask was a pair of cold and ruthless eyes. It was King of Hell Chu. Minister Chu, do we summon these people to surrender or? Tai Butian's eyes flashed as he asked. The general is dead. So, we naturally have to summon them to surrender. Chu Yang insipidly said. Execute Long Ao's bodyguards after they surrender. Execute several generals who are leading the troops. Imprison the remaining generals. Then, break up the troops and reorganize them. This is a new force. I can understand if the generals are killed or imprisoned. But why execute the bodyguards? Tai Butian frowned. I'm afraid. Now is not the time to think about mercy. Instead, we should think about survival. Survival is the key to the world's hegemony. Chu Yang coldly said. The reason why your majesty doesn't understand is that your majesty doesn't know what a bodyguard is. Bodyguard. These two words aren't in vain. Tai Butian smiled embarrassedly. A general next to him said, Your majesty doesn't command the army. So, it's understandable that you don't understand. However, we can't kill many of these bodyguards with our own hands. Because, as Long Ao's bodyguards, most of them will follow him and commit suicide once he dies. His expression was a little heavy as he said, Even if they don't die with him, they will still have the thought of taking revenge before they die. He let out a long sigh. Your Majesty, this is what Minister Chu meant by bodyguards. He paused for a moment and said, the so-called bodyguards are the real hardcore. In other words, they are the embodiment of the word loyalty. Often, there is an unstable rule on the battlefield. That is, the basic condition to measure a famous general is to see whether his bodyguards will die for him. How many people are willing to die for him? Tai Butian was stunned. Sure enough, after Long Ao died, some of his bodyguards wailed on the spot and cut themselves with their swords. The soldiers of Iron Cloud saw that the situation was hopeless after they started to surrender. So, they put down their weapons one after another. The remaining bodyguards killed many of their comrades in anger. Then, their comrades fought back and chopped them into meat paste. Iron Cloud's army didn't move. The ordinary soldiers of Great Zhao and the bodyguards of Iron Cloud were fighting a bloody battle. Each of the bodyguards had tears on their faces. They crazily chopped and killed while crazily shouting, "The great commander isn't that kind of person! The great commander isn't that kind of person! You have blasphemed the great commander! You!" Such tragic cries didn't disappear until the 3,000 bodyguards were completely buried. In fact, when there was only one person left, that person was still shouting with all his might when he made the last slash. "Isn't the marshal?" This voice was very loud. It seemed to be shouting for the great commander's eternal rest. It was to clear the great commander's name, and to protect the great commander's reputation. It all originated from the unconditional trust of the great commander when he was alive. When everyone misunderstood, the bodyguards sacrificed their lives to offer a final song of praise to the man they were loyal to. The great commander was worthy of our sacrifice. But his voice froze right there. His body was also submerged in the flashes of the swords. Their blood and vigor soared to the sky, just like their loyalty. Tai Badian looked at the bloody scene and sighed deeply. What a pity! Such a famous general died so sullenly. It's a pity, Chu Yang said indifferently. Your Majesty is overflowing with camaraderie. It's undesirable. His words weren't polite at all, but Tai Badian wasn't angry at all. She asked. Why? The so-called famous generals have survived hundreds of battles. Naturally, every general has his own loyal followers. When a general dies, many people will be buried with him. And these people are all willing to do it. This is the charm of the general himself, he said indifferently. If he doesn't deserve to be a general. On the battlefield, this kind of thing is too common. Some generals will even deliberately gather some homeless people, orphans, and prisoners on death row as their own subordinates. Because they know that these people have nothing. Even if it's just a smile, they will die for them. What's more, the grace of a new life. Besides, this is a war between two countries and not a civil war within the country, right? Tai Batian asked with a smile. That's right. I understand. The alliance won't pay dividends and won't let the tiger return to the mountain. But, as long as I see such a scene, I can't help but feel touched. Tai Batian laughed and said, Because there are so many heroes in the world, but I can't use all of them. Chu Zhang was silent for a while. Then, he said, When all the heroes in the world are used by the ruler can only turn them into mediocre people. When the birds are gone, the bow is hidden. When the cunning rabbit is dead, the hound is cooked. Although it's cruel, it's also inevitable after unification. Tai Batian was silent. After a long time, she sighed deeply and said, That's right. These words were obviously derogatory, but Tai Batian and Chu Yang both knew that this was the way to rule a country. When the birds are gone, the bow is no longer hidden. Who is to be shot at? When the cunning rabbit is gone, if the hound is not cooked, it will only bring disaster to the world. At the very least, it will be an unstable factor. Generals all knew that war was for peace. But when there was true peace, it was when the general retired. The greatest value of a soldier could only be reflected in the cruelty of war. That was all. War needed to raise morale, but peace needed stability and harmony. This was an irreconcilable contradiction to begin with. But Ian turned her head and looked at Chu Yang. She said deeply, "Minister Chu, I didn't expect you to have such a thorough understanding of the way to rule a country. Since ancient times, people have used the phrase 'the bough is hidden after the birds are gone' to scold those in power. But hearing it from you today, I realize that although this phrase is unpleasant to hear, it's actually a true way to rule a country. As long as the bough isn't destroyed after the birds are gone, it's already the magnanimity of an emperor," Chu Yang said quietly. But Ian took a deep breath and said firmly, "Absolutely not." This sentence was akin to an oath of allegiance. The conversation between the two was a little solemn. After this sentence, both of them didn't speak anymore. After a long time, Chu Yang raised his eyebrows and said, "We can open the city gates to accept the surrender." But Ian heaved a sigh of relief and smiled. The battle here has finally come to an end. His face was smiling, but he was thinking in his heart, "We're about to go to the main battlefield, and Yao Qianqian is there. I don't know, regarding the bough being hidden after the birds are gone, this is just my personal understanding." I suddenly felt emotional. Everyone can just take a look. Chapter 389. After Minister Chu took control of the army, he played a small trick. The enemy's 400,000 soldiers took off their armor and surrendered. He ended the battle without shedding a drop of blood. The enemy had reached a dead end. So, Minister Chu had resorted to trickery. But one couldn't deny that Minister Chu's strategy had no problems. He had acted swiftly and decisively the moment he had assumed office. He had continuously harassed the enemy dozens of times in one night. This had made the enemy panic. It was like removing salt from a wound. He had asked Wu Kuan-yun to go out and persuade the enemy to surrender. Wu Kuan-yun had a special status. So, he had personally come to persuade the enemy to surrender. Long Ao would have been despised if he hadn't come out. Moreover, he had sent Wu Kuan-yun to persuade the enemy to surrender. This had given Long Ao a vague hint, "We can talk." That's because the status of both sides was high enough. Long Ao had reached the end of his rope. Wu Kuan-yun's arrival had given him an opportunity to regain his face. So, he had no choice but to go out. Moreover, Long Ao had to go out under such circumstances. This chapter is provided by Baidu Tiaba of the World-Defying Stage Heavens. Wu Kuan-yun would have driven Long Ao crazy if he hadn't angered him to death in accordance with King of Hell Chu's teachings. Of course, Long Ao would have lost his prestige in the army at the very least. There would have been a commotion at most under normal circumstances. But he would have lost his prestige in this life and death situation, and that would have been the end of him. So, Long Ao had committed suicide. The 400,000 soldiers had lost their leader. They had lost confidence in Long Ao. In fact, they even despised him. Moreover, they were in a desperate situation. So, what else could they do but surrender? Even after this incident, they still refused to accept King of Hell Chu's decision. They thought, "I could have done it at such a time." However, this thought disappeared without a trace after they had taken over the army. And they had seen that Long Ao had secretly ordered people to open up a big slope. This slope would have been completed in half a day at most. If the general's thoughts before Chu Yang's arrival had been to wait for the enemy to starve to death and take advantage of the situation, then these 400,000 soldiers would have flown away right under their noses. That would be like a cooked duck flying away. If things really turned out like that, the generals would probably even have the heart to kill themselves. The generals were drenched in cold sweat when they were talking about how to deal with these captives. Especially the surrendered generals who had entered the commander's tent. They were so scared that they almost pissed their pants. Because Minister Chu had said, "Kill them all!" Minister Chu was wearing a black robe and a black veil as he spoke. His eyes were cold and cruel, without the slightest bit of emotion. Everyone was horrified. As the ruler of a country, but Ian repeatedly pleaded for leniency, believing that this move was against the harmony of the heavens. However, King of Helchu said, "What's wrong with that? Wasn't it just 400,000 people? Since I can smash 100,000 people to death, why would I care about a blood debt of 400,000? Hearing this, all the generals felt their bodies cramp. So, that extremely terrifying landslide that day was also caused by this King of Helchu? Oh my God, is he still human? None of the generals dared to say anything. Minister Chu was determined to kill. He even said, "Let them dig a big hole by themselves, then drive them all in and bury themselves alive." Tai Butian repeatedly pleaded for leniency. Therefore, King of Helchu seemed to have no choice but to relent under the sincere pleas of the ruler of a country. Obviously he was very unhappy. Threatening, he said, "Today is for His Majesty, otherwise I will kill you all. But, if any of these captives isn't obedient, I will kill the whole team. If any of them isn't obedient, I will bury all 400,000 of them alive." The surrendered generals walked out of the big tent after the terrifying meeting was over. Their legs were weak. Their faces were pale, and they were wiping their sweat. They were scared witless as they returned to their troops. Then they ordered, "No one is allowed to act blindly without thinking. Motherfucker, anyone who moves will be whipped." They also explained, His Majesty, the Emperor of Iron Cloud, had repeatedly argued with reason. So, he had saved our lives from King of Helchu's butcher's knife. One could well imagine what the response would be like. Chu Yang and Tai Butian played the role of good cop and bad cop. They pacified the captives, and handed them over to Wu Yi. Then, they left behind 150,000 soldiers to guard the heaven-splitting mountain pass, and led 300,000 soldiers to return in triumph to the main battlefield. Whether it was the defending generals or the surrendered generals, everyone heaved a sigh of relief when King of Helchu left. They didn't know what was going on. Perhaps it was a psychological effect, but they felt as if a thick layer of low clouds had shrouded the heaven-splitting mountain pass as soon as they saw King of Helchu's black robe. Tai Butian was grinning from ear to ear on the way. "Minister Chu, you played the role of bad cop very well." Lien was also doubtful. "Didn't you say that you wanted to surrender? So, why did you suddenly want to massacre them?" Fortunately, Lien's brain worked quickly. Chu Yang tilted his head, and looked at Tai Butian with a strange look in his eyes. "Your Majesty thinks that I'm joking?" Tai Butian's complexion changed. She said while stammering, "Don't tell me, you're not?" Chu Yang smiled and said in a cold voice, "These are merely 400,000 people. There's no harm in killing them. You must know that these captives may become the biggest variable if the Wuqing Road doesn't get defeated. After all, this is the heaven-splitting mountain pass. It's better to kill them cleanly. Once and for all. You don't need to worry about anything." Tai Butian was dumbstruck. She realized that she had broken out in cold sweat after a long while. 400,000 people! You want to kill them, and you want to kill them? Of course, you're going to be the lord of this world in the future. So, killing them all won't have a good influence on you. So, you pleaded for mercy, and I pushed the boat along with the current to give you face. Chu Yang said calmly. Lax? Black lines appeared on Tai Butian's forehead. Lien's face is really big. Tai Longqing hadn't slept for 3 days and 3 nights by the time Chu Yang and Tai Butian arrived at the main battlefield barracks. Tai Longqing was burning with anxiety because of the constant reports of the heaven-splitting mountain pass movements. Tai Longqing flew into a rage when he heard that Wu Kuan-yun had left His Majesty behind, and had run back to the heaven-splitting mountain pass to fight the enemy. He wanted to go there himself. He wanted to chop off Wu Kuan-yun's dog head even if the entire front was routed. Tai Longqing was so angry that he vomited blood. He hadn't been able to eat or sleep well these past few days. Each day felt like a year. Tai Longqing almost fainted from excitement when he saw Tai Butian return. He rushed over to greet her. His old eyes were almost brimming with tears. Tai Butian sensitively discovered that Chu Yang, who was beside her, had already disappeared without a trace. Niao Qianqian knew that he had gone to replace Wu Kuan-yun. She felt an indescribable sense of loss in her heart. Chu Yang rushed into Butian Pavilion's tent. Based on Wu Qianqian's habits, Chu Yang did not hesitate to find her tent. His speed was extremely fast. It was as if a light breeze had blown by, and he was already gone. He was about to open the door when he suddenly heard a sigh from inside. Chu Yang was startled. He couldn't help but stop his footsteps. His Majesty has returned. Has he returned? Miao Qianqian sat on the chair in a daze. Her heart was in a mess. Miao Qianqian wanted to be the first to run out when she heard that the army had returned. However, she stopped when she reached the door. What if he hasn't returned? What if His Majesty has brought back bad news? What should I do? This chapter is provided by the world-defying stage Heaven's Baidu Tiaba. She was worried about personal gains and losses. She didn't dare to move even a step. The truth was right in front of her. She would see it as long as she went out. However, she didn't dare to take this step no matter what. She was afraid that she would cry when she saw Chu Yang return. She was also afraid that Chu Yang hadn't returned, and was dead. She was afraid and hopeful. Her heart was in a mess. She couldn't make up her mind. Suddenly, her eyes darkened. A voice said, "Minister Chu, what national affairs are you thinking about?" Wu Qianqian's body trembled. She didn't dare to turn around. She closed her eyes and opened them again. A slender jade-like hand was about to pinch her arm. Am I dreaming? Am I dreaming? Then she viciously pinched him. It doesn't hurt? Wu Qianqian didn't believe it. She pinched again. It still doesn't hurt? She opened her eyes in disappointment. She said dejectedly, "It's really a dream, sigh." A voice that seemed to be grimacing in pain said, "Sister, of course it doesn't hurt. You pinched my arm. My poor arm is already purple." Wu Qianqian screamed and jumped up. Her chair flipped over with a bang. She turned around in surprise. However, she saw a distorted face. Chu Yang sucked in cold air and said, "Sister, please, let go of your hand." Wu Qianqian looked down. She saw that her slender jade-like fingers were pinching Chu Yang's arm. She had jumped up and turned around. However, she didn't let go. Moreover, she had unconsciously used too much strength in her surprise. She knew that his flesh had been twisted by 310 degrees. She quickly let go. She didn't know what to do for a moment. Should I throw myself at him and hug him? Or should I pretend that nothing happened? However, Miao Qianqian's eyes were already red. Tears streamed down her face. She felt her heart beating wildly. She was so excited that she felt that it was worth it even if she died at this moment. Because he came back safe and sound. He came back. I'm back. Chu Yang smiled and said, "You were worried, right?" Miao Qianqian smiled sadly. She quickly wiped her tears and turned around. She said, "It's good that you're back. Ha, you've made people worried these days." Miao Qianqian's voice had been very emotional when she had started to speak. She was trembling. However, she had calmed down by the time she had finished speaking. She turned around and looked at Chu Yang. She smiled and said, "You're back. I can finally relax. It's been such a long time. I'm really tired." Chu Yang saw that Wu Qianqian was trying her best to control her emotions. He suddenly felt a lump in his throat. It seemed that some kind of emotion was blocking his heart. He couldn't breathe. He forced himself to control himself and said, "Yes, it's been hard on you." Wu Qianqian smiled faintly and said, "You sit down. I'll go get you a cup of water." She turned around and left. The two of them had been separated for a long time. However, they were trying their best to talk about irrelevant things. They were trying their best to control themselves. They were afraid that they would overstep their boundaries. Wu Qianqian turned around and walked out of the tent. But her small mouth suddenly flattened. Then, she covered her mouth with all her might. Her tears started to flow out violently. But she controlled them with all her might. She didn't make any sound. She walked faster and faster until she finally reached a corner. Then, she squatted down, and started to cry silently. Chapter 390. By the time Wu Qianqian returned, she had already regained her usual appearance. Her eyes were a little red, but her whole person looked bright and beautiful. Her style was peerless. It seemed as if a long-lost vitality had returned to her body at this moment. She did not say anything, nor did she do anything. When Chu Yang was not around, she took over his role. She was king of Hell Chu. She was the black robe that intimidated the entire iron cloud. She was flawless. She killed decisively for him. She commanded heroes for him. She crossed thousands of miles for him. She used thunderous methods for him. She was resourceful for him. She was sinister and vicious for him. She bore everything for him. No one knew what kind of effort she had to put in to do all this. To be able to imitate a man to such an extent as a woman, she had to have a deep understanding of this person. She had to have an unforgettable impression of this person. However, when Chu Yang returned, she suddenly became the same Wu Qianqian who quietly accompanied Chu Yang, quietly watched him, and quietly assisted him when he was around. She was such a woman. She would never force herself to ask for anything, nor would she get anything. She would only silently wait and silently contribute herself. She was very smart. She could clearly see Chu Yang's daily behavior. Therefore, she understood. Therefore, she did not force herself. Therefore, she would only silently endure and silently love herself. I love you. This is my business. It has nothing to do with you. I never said that you have to accept me because I love you. I don't even want you to realize my feelings. I don't want you to feel embarrassed. If you want to leave, you can leave. But I am here. If you want to go back, you can go back. I am here. But as long as you don't take the initiative to confess to me, I will never take the initiative to say these words to you. Chu Yang, I like you. I won't. I am not afraid of your rejection. But I am afraid of waking up from my dream. Because in my dream, you are mine. After a long silence, Wu Qianqian began to speak. Her voice was very dull. Chu Yang, that second martial Uncle Li Jin Song, I have already taken care of him. Huh! Chu Yang was startled. Not only him. There are many people from beyond the heaven sect. I have already taken care of all of them. Niao Qianqian said calmly. This group of people will cause too much trouble in the future. Who knows when they will cause trouble? Once something happens, it will be a big problem. So I might as well clean them all up. Chu Yang's mouth became two big mouths. How did you clean it up? Chu Yang closed his mouth after a long while. He only felt that his chin had almost fallen off. He kept gagging. This girl was really good at pranks. To think that he would even deal with his martial uncles one by one. Wasn't he afraid that his father would make things difficult for him? I wanted to wait for you to come back and clean it up, but I thought that since you have been expelled from the sect, it would be inconvenient. Niao Qianqian said lightly. So I thought that I might as well do it for you. Chu Yang gave him a thumbs up. You're so thoughtful. Li Jin Song was poisoned because of his woman. It is called the Spring and Autumn Heartbreak Powder. In other words, it will flare up once a year. If there is no medicine to suppress it, the victim will suffer for 3 days and 3 nights before dying. All of his internal organs will rot. Second martial uncle had always been dissatisfied with father's decision to take charge of Beyond the Heaven sect. So, the Golden Horse Riders Department came looking for him at that time. They said that they could provide him with medicine, and that they could help him take charge of Beyond the Heaven sect. So, he was easily manipulated. Wu Qianqian continued. Moreover, he loves his woman very much. But Golden Horse Riders Department only provided him with medicine to temporarily suppress the poison. As for the crystal spirit mushroom, they didn't give him anything. They just left him hanging. I see. Chu Yang nodded. Well, when he was eavesdropping, Li Jin Song had asked those people for the crystal spirit mushroom, but it was to no avail. Then, he remembered that he had once entered the treasury of Golden Horse Rider's department. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. It wasn't that Golden Horse Rider's department didn't want to give it to him, but that thing. Golden Horse Rider's department didn't have it. How did you deal with it? Chu Yang asked. Killed him. Miao Qianqian's face was a little sad. I don't know why, but he had a premonition. He chose to assassinate Tai Longqing at night. In the end, he was besieged by people from Butian Pavilion and died on the spot. Before he died, he begged father to let go of his wife and son. But after that woman knew about this, she committed suicide. Miao Qianqian sighed and said, Before she died, she said, I don't care if he is a good man or a bad man. As long as he is alive, I will accompany him. As long as he is dead, I will go find him. After so many years, I've really caused him enough suffering. Now that I've reached the netherworld, I can finally stop causing him trouble and repay him properly. If this matter was told by someone else, it might have been an undying love. But when it came from Wu Qianqian's mouth, it was as plain as water. But it still contained a heavy charm. Chu Yang listened and sighed. Li Jianyin was expelled. His legs were broken. I am afraid. Miao Qianqian continued. As for the others, those who should be killed were killed, and those who should be crippled were crippled. They have all been cleaned up. Chu Yang was speechless. Miao Qianqian spoke plainly, but when she did this, she had to endure a lot of psychological pressure. Chu Yang could imagine it even if he only thought about it. I have an idea. Wu Qianqian looked at him and whispered. Wait until the war is over. If Iron Cloud is defeated, everything will be taken care of. If Iron Cloud wins, let Father and the others go back to Beyond the Heavens sect and rebuild Beyond the Heavens sect. They don't want Iron Cloud to be consecrated as a national sect. They don't want to hold any positions in the imperial court. Good! Chu Yang was full of admiration. This move of retreating in the face of adversity without any reward was really the best move. I have done everything for you, but I don't want anything. But you are the Emperor of Iron Cloud, the ruler of the world. You can't shortchange us, right? Moreover, I am now the same as you. I am no longer a disciple of Beyond the Heavens sect. Miao Qianqian lowered her eyes. Her expression could not be seen clearly. Why? Chu Yang was startled. Because you will leave sooner or later. So I will be the king of Hell Chu for a long time. Miao Qianqian smiled gently and added, the king of Hell Chu of this generation. Her laughter was cold and indifferent. It was as calm as stagnant water. She said, You, Chu Yang, are only a passerby. So, you are not the king of Hell Chu. You are the king of Hell Chu for a lifetime. The king of Hell Chu of this generation? The king of Hell Chu? The king of Hell Chu? Such an outstanding beauty with peerless talent would hide behind a black robe for a lifetime. Her youthful elegance and charm would be covered up for a lifetime. Chu Yang's heart suddenly felt as if it was being overturned. He looked at her in a daze. He only felt that his heart was in a mess. Wu Qianqian gently turned her head. Her eyes were like limpid autumn waters. They swept across Chu Yang's face. Chu Yang clearly felt a bone-piercing pain. Then he heard her say, Using your identity as the king of Hell Chu to make Beyond the Heavens sect immortal. Wasn't this your ultimate plan when you supported me in the beginning? Chu Yang felt a pain in his heart. He felt as if the pain had swept over him. His mind went blank in an instant. Iron Cloud readied its troops and horses, and prepared for war. Tai Butian had returned with 300,000 troops. Moreover, the number of troops in the country had increased over this period of time. So, the total number of troops had already exceeded 3 million. Great Zhao had nearly 1 million troops. But they had lost more than 1 million at the heaven-splitting mountain pass. So, they only had 4 million troops left. Both sides were almost evenly matched. Tai Longqing's heart had been in suspense for a long time. But he finally felt relieved. Tai Butian and Chu Yang had arrived at Iron Cloud's military camp that night. Suddenly, the great Zhao's camp burst into thunderous cheers. It was like a tsunami. It didn't disperse for a long time. It was as lively as the New Year's celebration. Then, a big flag was hoisted high from Great Zhao's military camp. A golden dragon was treading on the white clouds. The two words Diwu were swaying in the wind. The whistling summer wind made a rustling sound. Its imposing aura was vigorous as if it wanted to dominate the world. Diwu Qingro had arrived. It wasn't clear whether it was a coincidence or deliberate. In short, Tai Longcheng, Tai Butian, and Diwu Qingro had been fighting for several years. And King of Hell Chu and Diwu Qingro brazenly faced each other at this moment. This battle would decide the fate of the world. Diwu Qingro's complacent expression was swept away. His face was as calm as water. He stepped into the commander's tent. His heart was burning with anger. He had received the news that Jin Nengkai and the others had been annihilated the day before. This news was like a bolt from the blue. It had thrown Diwu Qingro, who had always been calm and composed, into a mess. He had anticipated that it would be impossible for those three armies to be annihilated. However, he couldn't help but sigh when he heard the report. He didn't say anything. The mountains suddenly collapsed, and the ground cracked. The slanting valley was filled up. Hundreds of thousands of people were buried alive. More than 1 million soldiers were divided into two sections. The outside couldn't enter, and the inside couldn't come out. This is the will of heaven. Diwu Qingro's heart was somewhat heavy. Great Zhao's army was much more than iron clouds on the surface. But he knew that there was a clear difference in the fighting strength of both sides. Iron Cloud was located in the north. So, its people were valiant. Except for a few people, almost everyone could fight on horseback. And they could dismount and fight on foot. As long as there were enough war horses, there would be as many cavalry soldiers as there were war horses. On the other hand, Great Zhao's army couldn't do that. It was located in the south. The climate was mild. And the people there were soft and tender. They weren't on the same level as the fierce and rough soldiers of Iron Cloud. Therefore, Diwu Qingro could only use his wisdom to make up for it. However, Diwu Qingro also had a great consolation. King of Hell Chu is dead. Otherwise, it would have been very troublesome for me to face the Iron Cloud Triangle alone. Jing Menghun had rushed to Diwu Qingro's side with bruises all over his body. Diwu Qingro couldn't believe his eyes. He was a Peking level expert. He had dispatched millions of people to kill a revered level expert like King of Hell Chu. And Jing Menghun had crippled him. Moreover, his body was covered with cuts and bruises. He had almost lost his life. This was beyond everyone's expectations. However, Diwu Qingro had heard that hundreds of people had attacked King of Hell Chu at the end of the battle. And Jing Menghun had successfully launched a sneak attack. He felt that King of Hell Chu was dead. And Jing Menghun was very confident. Even an Emperor-level expert wouldn't have been able to withstand that kind of attack. Diwu Qingro sighed the next day. It's a pity that King of Hell Chu wasn't able to fight a decisive battle with such a hero on the battlefield. It's a real regret of my life. Suddenly, a soldier came to report. Prime Minister, a man from Iron Cloud has come out. He's wearing black clothes, a black robe, and a black veil. He claims to be an old friend of the Prime Minister's mansion. He says that he wants to thank the Prime Minister for his generosity in gifting the orchid incense to you. So, he wants to talk with the Prime Minister. Chapter 391. Then, he looked at Jing Menghun with a gentle gaze. Jing Menghun's complexion turned deathly pale. He cried out, "This is impossible!" Diwu Qingro insipidly said, "He's here. What's impossible?" Jing Menghun was in a daze. Diwu Qingro had already stood up. A group of Iron Cloud soldiers were standing in neat rows on the battlefield. They were standing in a quiet manner. The east wind was blazing. Iron Cloud's military flag was pointed straight to the sky. Then, it was blown up neatly with a flapping sound. The fluttering sound of the military flag could make anyone who heard it feel a desire to kill. It was a desire for war. 2 fast horses were standing motionless in front of the troops. 2 men were standing upright on the backs of the horses. It couldn't be seen how old they were. They were standing in front of a magnificent army. But they still looked somewhat blurry under the blazing sun. They couldn't be seen clearly. In front of them, a black horse stood alone. There was a man on the horse. He was dressed in black and wore a black robe. He wore a ferocious golden mask. His loose black robe made a sharp sound as it fluttered in the wind of the east wind. Around the black-clothed man, a biting cold aura was constantly surging and churning. He was alone on his horse. But the soldiers of the great Zhao army on the other side had a clear feeling in their hearts. It was as if an ancient devil god had suddenly drilled out from the depths of hell. He had appeared in broad daylight. Wherever his sharp gaze landed, everyone felt a bone-chilling coldness. King of Hell Chu. He didn't need to announce his name. But the soldiers of Great Zhao couldn't help but think of this name as soon as they saw him. Only this kind of imposing manner, could be on par with Prime Minister Diwu. Only such a person could withstand the all-out pursuit of the Golden Horse Riders Department. And he had violently galloped for a distance of 13,000 miles. And he had appeared here at this moment. The bugle horn of Great Zhao's army resounded in a desolate manner. The entire army suddenly parted like a tide. It left a quiet and dry road between them. Everyone's eyes became full of respect and fanaticism at this moment. The sound of hoofbeats slowly resounded. Diwu Qingrou's guards appeared. Diwu Qingrou appeared in front of King of Helchu with a faint smile on his face. The guard was somewhat hesitant, but Diwu Qingrou pointed his folding fan forward. His attitude was very firm. The guards had no choice but to continue to carry him forward. They only stopped when they crossed the line. Then Diwu Qingrou waved his hand, and all the soldiers retreated. Only Diwu Qingrou's carefree chair was left on the battlefield, and he was facing a 1,000-man army all by himself. Then Diwu Qingrou slightly raised his head. He looked at Chu Yang and smiled. His smile was light, but it contained many kinds of gratitude. The 2 shadows were somewhat restless. Diwu Qingrou is rumored to not know any martial arts. This is a heaven-sent opportunity. What if he were to kill or capture him now? The 2 moved slightly, and Chu Yang was startled. He shouted in a low voice, "Do you want to die?" Ing was stunned. "Diwu Qingrou is an emperor-level expert," Chu Yang said in a low voice. The 2 shadows broke out in a cold sweat, and their eyes became dull. Emperor-level expert? Diwu Qingrou had deceived the world? Then Chu Yang urged his warhorse. The warhorse resolutely walked towards Diwu Qingrou step by step. The distance was getting closer and closer. Line! The distance between the 2 was less than 30 feet. This was a very dangerous distance. Especially for Chu Yang, it was even more dangerous. Then Chu Yang stopped the warhorse, and raised his eyes to look at Diwu Qingrou. Diwu Qingrou also raised his head at this time. He looked at Chu Yang with a warm gaze. Their eyes met. It was unknown why, but all the soldiers behind them who knew that these 2 men were meeting today felt a strange feeling rise in their hearts the moment their eyes met. It seemed as if the whole world had suddenly shaken at this moment. Then, it suddenly became dark. Then, Diwu Qingrou laughed in a relaxed manner. He sat on the carefree chair. His whole body was extremely relaxed. He said, "It's not easy to meet you." Chu Yang replied with equal harshness. "Prime Minister Diwu also doesn't go out of the house." Diwu Qingrou laughed happily and said, "I need qualifications internally. I also need qualifications externally." Chu Yang also laughed. His meeting with Diwu Qingrou today was also a stroke of genius. Originally, he thought that he would hide in the dark and use his own energy to cause destruction. Then, he would wait for the right opportunity to strike. However, Chu Yang thought for a long time. Then, he gave up and decided to meet directly. The news that King of Hell Chu was still alive would not be hidden from Diwu Qingro sooner or later. However, if he knew from other people's mouths, his heart would have a buffer. He would be mentally prepared. Diwu Qingro would quickly adjust himself. He would not be swayed by this news. Moreover, he would quickly formulate countermeasures. When he met Chu Yang again, he would have a sense of accomplishment. He would have a sense of satisfaction that everything was under his control. However, Chu Yang had suddenly jumped out and asked to see Diwu Qingro when Diwu Qingro was fully confident that the acting king was dead. This was a heavy blow to Diwu Qingro's complacency. This would make Diwu Qingro feel frustrated. So, he didn't die. I paid such a big price, and he didn't die. What Chu Yang needed was for Diwu Qingro to feel frustrated. Even if it was only a trace, it would make him feel that everything had deviated from his control. This was because the deciding factor of this war was not the number of troops. It was Diwu Qingro. If Diwu Qingro continued to take every possibility into account, then Iron Cloud's side would have gone all out. It would have been a long and arduous war. And they would have been defeated in the end. Therefore, Chu Yang had to do everything he could to break Diwu Qingro's mental state. And this sudden meeting was his first move. Diwu Qingro looked at his ferocious mask with some interest. He laughed and said, "You should have let those two come." Chu Yang smiled mischievously. "Come. I would have given you a chance to make a move. Would I have given you enough reason to kill the three of us in front of everyone?" "No." Diwu Qingro smiled. "They would have died if they had come. But you... I am not sure." He gently exhaled and said casually, "The mysterious King of Hell Chu. The King of Hell Chu who slaughtered the entire 13,000-mile border of Great Xiao." "Ha!" Chu Yang laughed. "It is my honor to receive such an evaluation from the Prime Minister." Diwu Qingro was silent for a while. Then he said, "In Great Xiao those two Chus, were you?" "Yes." Chu Yang did not hide anything. There was no point in denying it at this moment. "Well, you were the one who received my palm, right?" Diwu Qingro asked, but his tone was firm. "Yes." "Well?" Diwu Qingro's tone became calmer. He said, "You were the one who entered my hidden treasure house, right?" "Hidden treasure house?" Chu Yang frowned. "Not you." Diwu Qingro asked softly. "No," Chu Yang said. That was a mysterious ability that involved Jie Sun. How could Chu Yang admit it? "Oh, so it wasn't you," Diwu Qingro said quietly. He carefully observed Chu Yang's facial expression from the corner of his eye. It was so sharp that it seemed as if it could penetrate his mask and see every inch of his face. After a long time, Diwu Qingro slowly said, "It seems that it was someone else." Unconsciously, he let out a sigh of relief. King of Hell Chu is not the master of Jie Sun. "Prime Minister, you must take good care of the hidden treasure house," Chu Yang reminded him. "It would be a huge loss if one or two items were taken away from such an important place." "Are you taking pleasure in other people's misfortune?" Diwu Qingro laughed involuntarily. Then, his eyes slowly became sharp as he said, "You didn't come to see me today to talk nonsense." Chu Yang nodded seriously. "Actually, today I really just want to see what kind of person Prime Minister Diwu is. He is the ruler of the entire Great Xiao, and has the entire world in his hands." Diwu Qingro smiled slowly. "It is also a pleasure to watch the war." He calmly looked at Chu Yang. "The moment you appeared and asked to see me, I knew that the war between the two countries had begun. Prime Minister Diwu, you must go all out in this war of the world." Chu Yang's eyes gradually became sharp. He softly said, "You have a great reputation. Don't ruin it. I will go all out." Diwu Qingro slowly nodded. He didn't respond to Chu Yang's aggressiveness. Instead, he simply and calmly stated a fact. "Let's see who can decide the fate of this battlefield. Let's see who can rise and fall." "King of Hell Chu, ha ha ha," Diwu Qingro softly said. "Don't let me down. I'm afraid that the Prime Minister will exceed your expectations." Chu Yang said indifferently. Suddenly, he fiercely looked at Di Wuqingro. His eyes were as sharp as swords. It seemed as if two fierce divine swords were piercing through the blue dome of heaven. Di Wuqingro was still calm. But his pupils slightly shrank as he said, "Even if it is beyond my expectations, I must face it. I must win." Both of them no longer spoke. The sun was shining in the sky. There were no clouds for thousands of miles. However, everyone in the army behind the two of them could feel that a storm was coming. It seemed as if the entire blue sky was about to collapse at this moment. After a long time, Chu Yang looked up at the sky and insipidly said, "Prime Minister, if you lose this war, your name, Di Wuqingro, will be immortalized on this continent. The world will remember the name, Di Wuqingro. It will become a legend." Di Wuqingro calmly said, "After the destruction of Iron Cloud, I promise to write a biography of you. I will make the name of King of Hell Chu a legend of the continent." Both of them laughed together. Chapter 392. Chu Yang's laughter reverberated throughout the world. It seemed as if it could shake the wind and thunder. King of Hell Chu's arrogant attitude was imprinted in the hearts of the two armies. The heavens trembled, the mountains shook, and the earth moved. The three armies held their breaths. It seemed as if this figure who was roaring towards the sky was like a heaven-shaking god. It seemed as if he could cut the sky and the earth into two halves wherever he passed. So arrogant! So arrogant! This King of Hell Chu is good. Di Wuqingro chuckled and shook his head. I was tricked by this guy in the end. He can proudly declare to the world that he can be as arrogant as he can. But I can't. But this has created an illusion in front of the two armies, that I have fallen into a disadvantageous position. This guy. He won't let go of any opportunity. Di Wuqingro slowly thought as he returned to his camp. He couldn't help but smile bitterly and shake his head while thinking about Chu Yang's words. This King of Hell Chu's words seemed meaningless on the surface. But in reality, every word he said was aimed at the defenses in his heart. Perhaps I would have been influenced by him if my mind wasn't firm. Immortality, doesn't it affect me? Di Wuqingro's face sank. Millions of soldiers remained silent as they watched the two separate. They watched King of Hell Chu ride his horse back to the camp. They watched Di Wuqingro return. And the day passed like this. The curtain of night fell, and the world became dark. The Iron Cloud's camp was dotted with stars. The patrolling troops were coming and going. The army was ready for battle. Tai Longqing and Tai Butian were sitting opposite each other in the commander's tent. This King of Hell Chu is much more arrogant and overbearing than before. Tai Longqing smacked his lips and praised. He threatened Di Wuqingro. He made Di Wuqingro eat a loss in front of so many people. This is an unparalleled boost to the army's morale. Tai Butian smiled and replied, "Yes." He thought, that's natural. After all, King of Hell Chu is the real King of Hell Chu. However, Di Wuqingro ate a loss in silence. So, Great Xiao's morale will inevitably be affected. If Di Wuqingro wants to restore his reputation, then he can only use his face to do so. Therefore, Great Xiao may attack the camp tonight. Tai Longqing and Di Wuqingro had fought for half of their lives. So, it could be said that they understood each other very well. It's just that, even if it's a sneak attack, it's hard to predict what kind of measures he'll take and what kind of methods he'll use. Tai Butian frowned. The only thing we can do now is to stick to the status quo. Tai Longqing took a deep breath. In Butian Pavilion's main camp, King of Hell Chu was wearing a black robe and a sinister mask. He looked like the real King of Hell as he sat majestically on the highest chair. His sharp gaze was incomparably sharp as he looked at his subordinates. A bone-chilling cold filled the tent. Ching-Ang and Chen-Yentong both sat straight and expressionless. Their hearts were filled with apprehension. What's going on? The minister had clearly relaxed for a while. Why is his coercion getting heavier and heavier this time? This feeling of oppression was really unbearable, making it hard for him to sit still. She stole a glance at Wu Qianqian, who was standing next to Chu Yang with an ice-cold expression. She cursed silently. When did this Russian granny come? How come we didn't see her? Especially during this period of time, the new recruits of Butian Pavilion were seeing the real king of Hell Chu for the first time. They were so frightened by this gloomy atmosphere that they almost peed in their pants. "Two hall leaders, please report everything that has happened recently." Chu Yang's finger gently tapped on the table in front of him. It was as if the king of hell was beating a drum. Both of them cursed silently in their hearts. Didn't you already know? But in this kind of situation, who would dare to say even half a word? They had no choice but to report everything again. Chu Jiang quietly listened. Finally, he finished listening and said casually, "So, you're saying that everyone has been very busy during this period of time, right? So, everyone's strength hasn't improved. It's not because everyone didn't work hard, but because they were too busy? Isn't that the case?" Cheng'ang and Qin Yutong's faces fell at the same time. This was the only thing that Minister Chu had not urged during this period of time. Everyone felt as if they had been pardoned. They did not expect that he would bring it up today. "This is the place where we are right now. Tens of millions of ghosts are screaming day and night," Chu Jiang said casually. "Now, in my opinion, as long as the war starts, many of you will join the ranks of these ghosts. This is the consequence of not working hard on your own strength." Minister Chu snorted heavily. Everyone kept quiet out of fear. "We will soon face Golden Horse Riders Department. Everyone get ready," Chu Jiang said casually. Then, he waved his hand. Cheng'ang and the others hurriedly left. They were sweating profusely. The minister's power was getting heavier and heavier. Only Wu Qianqian and Chu Yang were left in the tent. "The strength of these people must be pushed every day," Chu Yang said softly. "People are lazy. And it's impossible for these people to rely on self-conscious practice to increase their strength. Therefore, you must set a goal for them every once in a while. Let them complete it as a mission. This will increase the strength of Butian Pavilion." "Yes," Wu Qianqian said. "What stage are you at now?" Chu Yang looked at Wu Qianqian. "Third grade martial master," Wu Qianqian said somewhat embarrassedly. She didn't know that her progress was enough to make many people dumbfounded. "Not bad," Chu Yang said. It was indeed not bad. The martial arts of Beyond the Heavens sect were known for their steady progress. It was impossible to improve quickly. Wu Qianqian's speed was already beyond Chu Yang's expectations. Wu Qianqian bit her lips and said, "Chu Yang, I want strength. I want to advance quickly. Can you help me?" she said awkwardly. "I know you have many martial arts techniques. I want to improve myself quickly. The faster the better. I don't want to catch up with you. But I want to break into upper 3 heavens or upper 3 heavens when I miss you. I want to listen to your legends." Chu Yang pondered for a moment. "Okay. I will choose for you." How could Chu Yang not want Wu Qianqian to improve her strength? That way, she would at least have the ability to protect herself. Then, Chu Yang frowned and thought. He asked the sword spirit in his mind, "Is there a martial art suitable for women to practice? It's more powerful and faster to practice." The sword spirit was sitting cross-legged between the mysterious Yang Jade and the mysterious Jade Crystal. He had recovered his spirit with the help of the mysterious Yang Jade and the mysterious Jade Crystal. Moreover, he had made progress. He frowned when he heard Chu Yang's question. "A martial art for women to practice? Well, don't talk about the ordinary ones. They are too slow," Chu Yang flatly rejected. "Then there's only one," the sword spirit said. "Fortunately, my strength has improved greatly. So, I have remembered many things. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to answer your question." "What? How about the mysterious Yin transformation?" The sword spirit was clearly proud of himself. He looked as if he was presenting a treasure. Mysterious Yin transformation? Chu Yang was startled. "Isn't that a devil martial art?" "Nonsense," the sword spirit angrily said. "This is the most orthodox martial art. but someone tampered with the formula and reversed the meridians. So, this martial art must absorb the power of a girl's mysterious female body to practice. But I have the complete formula of the mysterious transformation technique here. So, that's how it is. Chu Yang touched his nose. I'm obviously ignorant and inexperienced compared to this 10,000-year-old monster. The sword spirit closed his eyes. Not long after, 3 old books fell out with a bang. Mysterious transformation technique turning soldier step mysterious transformation technique. Chu Yang looked at these 3 books in his consciousness. He couldn't help but be speechless. He suddenly had a feeling that this spirit-scraping technique is a martial art treasure trove. Also, I must remind you that this mysterious transformation technique will be faster if you use it with 7 cold energy, or mysterious jade crystal. The sword spirit was obviously reluctant to part with the mysterious jade crystal. I understand. Chu Yang mischievously smiled. Since that's the case, you don't need to practice the martial arts of Beyond the Heavens sect. I'll teach you another one. Chu Yang's mind turned. Mysterious transformation technique had caused a huge bloody disaster in the Chongtian continent thousands of years ago. Everyone thought that this was the most evil martial art. It's better not to tell Wu Qianqian my real name. I don't want to bring her endless trouble. What? Wu Qianqian's spirit was lifted. Ice Jade Divine Technique. Chu Yang rolled his eyes and said, I'll teach you the formula now. You must remember it well. Don't form it into words. This is the continent's top martial art. You'll be in big trouble if other people know about it. Okay. Wu Qianqian nodded vigorously. Her eyes shone. The continent's top martial art? That's great. I'll be able to close the distance between you and me. Wu Qianqian was extremely smart. She didn't need a long time to memorize the formula. Chu Yang was already thinking about the mysterious jade crystal. Sword spirit, how many mysterious jade crystals do I need? How many? The sword spirit rolled his eyes. You only need a small piece to wear. Why do you need a lot? Well, I'll take a small piece. Chu Yang looked at the space. The sword spirit was sitting cross-legged in a huge array of mysterious yang jade and mysterious jade crystal. He said, Will this array work for me? Of course it will. The sword spirit snorted. This is a yin-yang array. It can gather the purest spirit energy. Why didn't you tell me? Chu Yang asked angrily. I haven't recovered yet. The sword spirit felt somewhat guilty. He said, Moreover, you have so many good things. Why did you put them all outside to set up the array? You can't do this even if you want to die. What about the small ones? Chu Yang asked. The small ones also seemed to work. The sword spirit was helpless. He had no choice but to grab a finger-sized piece of mysterious yang jade and a piece of mysterious jade crystal. He needed them, and made them into a strange shape. He rolled his eyes and said, I know you want to leave a way out for your confidant. Take them. Chu Yang was overjoyed. Chapter 393. This is for you. Chu Yang rummaged in his bosom and handed it over to Wu Qianqian. This is. Wu Qianqian was somewhat surprised. Wear this with you. It can double your practice speed, Chu Yang said vaguely. It's beautiful. Wu Qianqian didn't know what it was, but she felt comfortable holding it in her hand. It was slightly cold on one side and slightly warm on the other. However, the cold and warm seemed to be interchanging with each other. She looked at it fondly for a while. Then, she put it away like a treasure. Practice well, Chu Yang said in a very encouraging manner. Wu Qianqian smiled sweetly. She didn't care about the secret manual. She cared about the fact that Chu Yang had finally given her a treasure. He had personally given it to her. This made Wu Qianqian's heart feel very sweet. Chu Yang didn't know that his Xianyin transformation and the yin-yang jade pendant would give birth to a terrifying character. That was because Chu Yang didn't know one thing. Even the sword spirit didn't know. Wu Qianqian had grown up in a place with 7 shades cold energy. Moreover, This extremely intelligent woman was born with the Xianyin female puppet body. The Xianyin transformation, as its name implied, could transform an ordinary woman's physique into a Xianyin female puppet body. Then, it could display a terrifying power. However, Wu Qianqian didn't need this transformation. She could directly enter the Xianyin realm. This was like practicing martial arts or cultivating immortality. An ordinary person would start from the body. Then, they would temper their bones and organs step by step. Then, they would go from Hotian to Xiantian. After that, they would reach foundation establishment and become immortal. However, Wu Qianqian's body had already reached foundation establishment. She was just waiting to receive the bow. Her starting point was much higher than most people's. Everyone started from the flat ground. But Wu Qianqian started from the clouds. How could it be generalized? Although she wouldn't reach the level of the Master of Calamity Sword, she was more than one level higher than Chu Yang in terms of strength. Of course, Chu Yang didn't know this at the moment. This page was destined not to be peaceful. Suddenly, the lights of Du Wuqing Ro's army were extinguished. Iron Cloud's side became nervous. Then, a team of soldiers rushed towards Iron Cloud's camp like an angry dragon from the dark. Iron Cloud's side. The archers would quickly prepare, and the arrows would come down like rain. However, the Great Zhao's army suddenly changed its direction when it was still several hundred feet away from the Iron Cloud's military camp. Then, it rolled up like a gale. Then, it took a small detour, and returned to its original position with a rumbling sound. So it was just a false alarm. Then, the Great Zhao's army attacked from all directions. They attacked from the east and the west, and attacked from every angle. However, this kind of harassment could turn into reality at any time, making it difficult for others to grasp. Du Wuqing Ro's harassment would be more effective the longer the battle line was stretched out. The soldiers of Iron Cloud had been harassed dozens of times in a row. And this had caused the soldiers of Iron Cloud to curse out loud. Some bad-tempered generals even began to curse. What the fuck? How could he let her sleep? Why don't you just charge over and start a fight? In the commander's tent, Tai Long Cheng's expression was calm as he commanded. Now was not the time for a decisive battle. It would be really bad if he, the commander, was angered as well. As for Tai Butian, she had already gone to bed. His Majesty the Emperor had not been able to sleep well these past few days. Now, he could finally have a good sleep. Du Wuqing Ro's harassment was endless. The sky had not yet brightened, but he had already attacked 40 to 50 times. Sometimes, he would attack from 7 or 8 directions at the same time. Then, another wave of attack came as dawn approached. This time, 4 troops came at the same time. Alarms sounded from 4 directions at the same time. The troops from the other 3 directions only harassed for a while, and then retreated. Everyone was used to this. They would only use the archers to resist for a while, and these people would retreat. But Gui's seemingly flat army did not retreat. They faced the rain of arrows, and madly rushed into the Iron Cloud's military camp with irresistible force. This was beyond everyone's expectations. The number of this cavalry wasn't very large. It was only about 2,000 or 3,000. But every one of them was brave and unstoppable. Iron Cloud's valiant soldiers couldn't even last 1 round in front of them. Moreover, the seemingly ordinary armor on their bodies was impervious to swords and spears. The arrows were shot, and issued a crisp sound of impact. Then, they bounced back. They broke through the fences and the defensive positions. Then, they split into small groups and scattered with a loud bang. They fell into the pit that had been dug earlier. Iron Cloud's troops were cheering when they heard an orderly roar. Then, the war horses fiercely jumped out of the pit, and thrust out their spears like lightning. Screams were heard everywhere. The cavalry had split up, and then suddenly converged into one. They were like an unstoppable flood as they rushed into the depths of Iron Cloud's army. Iron Cloud's high-ranking officers were furious. They mobilized their own troops to encircle and intercept them. Tai Longqing stood on a high ground, and looked at the Iron Cloud's troops from afar. he sighed and said. Golden Horse Riders Department's reputation is well deserved. He paused for a moment, and then said, Diwu Ro is willing to pay such a price. The other high-ranking officers nodded one after another. They looked at this troop with shock in their eyes. They thought of their own subordinates. How many times would our troops be able to withstand such an elite troop if we were caught off guard? This troop of Golden Horse Riders had rushed forward for a short distance, but it had turned into an iron wall in front of them. However, this troop of riders had suddenly changed direction. They had made a turn that an ordinary cavalry troop would never have been able to make. And they had slaughtered their way out from another direction. It didn't take long, it had only been half an hour. Smoke billowed, and battle cries shook the sky. Dawn had arrived. This troop of riders had slaughtered their way out of this place, and had left behind a trail of blood and flesh. They had slaughtered their way out of Iron Cloud's tight defensive perimeter, and had returned to their main camp. They had killed around 2,000 of their 2,500 men. For Great Zhao, this was undoubtedly a glorious victory. Our Great Zhao is still invincible. Iron Cloud can't withstand a single blow from us. The morale of Great Zhao's army had suddenly soared. Tai Long Cheng's eyes were profound as he watched the Golden Horse Riders leave. His face was calm. Supreme Commander, why didn't we dispatch our elite troops to stop them in one fell swoop? A general next to him was somewhat angry and puzzled. This is Minister Chu's decision. Tai Longqing indifferently said. It's not the time to dispatch our elite troops. The dissatisfied generals suddenly became silent as soon as they heard that it was Minister Chu's decision. They remembered the arrogant king of Hell Chu who had embarrassed Diwu Ro in front of a 1,000,000-man army. King of Hell Chu's loud roar had silenced the entire 8 million-man army of the two countries. No one had dared to raise any objections. No one knew that Diwu Ro had been standing alone on the roof of the Supreme Commander's tent that night. He had been looking at the twinkling stars in the sky. His face had turned ashen. Diwu Ro had arrived here after he had arranged the assault strategy. He had been standing there for the entire night. The soldiers knew that Prime Minister Diwu had gone to sleep. But they didn't know that he hadn't slept at all. Why is this? Diwu Ro tightly knitted his brows and muttered to himself. The stars had only blurred the mysteries of heaven the last time. But why did the universe suddenly turn upside down this time? Great Zhao, which was as bright as the sun, suddenly dimmed. And the Emperor Star of Iron Cloud had always been dim and obscure. But it had suddenly shone with boundless radiance. Diwu Ro was puzzled. The last time I had seen the celestial phenomenon was when the two sides were entangled. It was obscure and difficult to understand. But it's so clear now. What happened during this period of time? Diwu Ro was confused. He only felt that his thoughts were in a mess. He didn't know that Tai Butian would have been so ashamed that she would have been unable to show her face if he had asked her about it. After all, she had saved Chu Yang that night before dawn. The intelligence star has dimmed. A large number of military stars have fallen. The north is shining with red light. The south is bowing and surrendering to the north. But what's going on with this star? Diwu Ro stared at the night sky. His brows knitted tighter and tighter. A star was shining in the sky within his observation range. It was emitting a dazzling brilliance. The nearby stars were dim and lightless. Perhaps they couldn't be seen at all. This was the Emperor Star. However, above this star, there was another star that shone brightly. The Emperor Star's incomparable brilliance was unable to suppress this star. Furthermore, the two stars didn't repel each other at all. Instead, they seemed to be getting along very well. The auxiliary stars should have been below the Emperor Star. But why is this auxiliary star above the Emperor Star? The master is weak and the ministers are strong. This is a great calamity. But why is it so harmonious? The auxiliary star had never appeared before. So, why did it suddenly appear this time? Could it be that this auxiliary star is King of Hell Chu? Diwu Ro was distressed as he pondered. There's only one possibility for such a situation to occur. And that is, something happened between King of Hell Chu and Tai Butian. But what could have happened that could have caused such a huge change in the celestial phenomenon? The wisdom star has dimmed. Could it be that I, Diwu Qingro, will face an unpredictable calamity? Diwu Qingro stood in a daze for a long time. He felt as if his thoughts were in a mess. He couldn't sort them out at all. This sudden change in the celestial phenomenon had thoroughly overturned Diwu Qingro's understanding of the celestial phenomenon. He felt as if his head was about to explode as he thought about it. The Emperor star is strong. It's clear that it's as bright as the sun. Since that's the case, it's the will of heaven. But the Emperor star had always been shining in Great Xiao before this. The red light and auspicious aura were clearly in Great Xiao. Why did it suddenly change? Isn't this change playing with me, Diwu Qingro, for the rest of my life? Diwu Qingro's face revealed endless frustration and anger. Heaven, why are you playing with me like this? The Emperor's star has always been in the south for 25 years. But it suddenly shifted to the north at this decisive moment. This is the will of heaven. How can you make such a joke? Chapter 394. 25 years ago, Diwu Qingro had seen the celestial phenomenon. Therefore, he had shouldered the mission of his clan and had come to the lower three heavens with the ambition of unifying the world. Following the heavens' will was the way to success. How could Diwu Qingro have chosen the wrong side with the celestial phenomenon as a guide? Therefore, he had entered Great Xiao as he wished. He had slowly grasped power, and had eventually become an ambitious and ruthless person who could command the world by himself. However, the celestial phenomenon had suddenly changed at the time of the decisive battle. This was undoubtedly telling him, all your efforts are just a joke. You are being toyed with, that's all. The black celestial phenomenon you saw is fake. It's fake. The real thing has only appeared now. This was equivalent to toying with Diwu Qingro's life's work. Why would Diwu Qingro have sought refuge with Great Xiao if he had known that the heavens would eventually belong to Iron Cloud? He had suddenly changed his mind when he could no longer look back. Moreover, it was an irresistible heaven's will. How could this not make Diwu Qingro mentally and physically exhausted? Even if it's heaven's will, I will make heaven's will pay the price. However, Diwu Qingro's elegant beard was stained with blood. His eyes suddenly turned gloomy as he fiercely muttered to himself. Even if I can't reverse it, I, Diwu Qingro, can't be humiliated. Even if heaven's will can't be reversed, I will bury these 8 million soldiers with me. I want the world to remember the name of Diwu Qingro. The armies of the two countries frequently killed each other in the next half-month. The war had reached a stalemate. Diwu Qingro's crafty schemes came out one after another. He created a diversion in the east and attacked in the west. It seemed as if his ingenious schemes were endless. Iron Cloud had Tai Longqing, Tai Butian, and King of Hell Chu on their side. Diwu Qingro's strategy could be described as unfathomable. His insight into the war situation was so keen that it made people's hearts cold. Diwu Qingro had the overall situation under his control. He wantonly dispatched his army. The Golden Horse Riders Department's army was especially unpredictable. Diwu Qingro knew that his original arrangement was useless now that King of Hell Chu had returned. They would only be defeated by the enemy if they were to disperse. Therefore, he formed another army under Jing Menghun's command. The lethality of this army became even more terrifying. There were dozens of battles every day, but there was no sign of a decisive battle. Tai Longqing, Tai Butian, and Chu Yang had been forced to separate under his immense pressure. He confronted Diwu Qingro. However, during this period of time, Chu Yang had fallen into a strange state of mind. Things started half a month ago. Ever since Chu Yang had given Wu Qingqing the secret manual, she had been allowed to cultivate it by herself. But on the night of the next 2 days, Wu Qingqing came to Chu Yang's tent uneasily. She wanted to say something but hesitated. What is it? Chu Yang asked. Chu Yang, I seem to have broken through. Wu Qingqing was a little uncertain. With some fear and helplessness, she said, No, I didn't act recklessly. I just followed the mental cultivation method of the Ice Jade Divine Technique, and then I discovered the bottleneck of this mental cultivation method. I didn't feel it, but I advanced to the 4th grade of Martial Master. Huh? Chu Yang's eyes widened. Let me see. Even if you are a genius, you can't be this fast. Chu Yang grabbed Wu Qingqing's wrist. His energy entered her body and circled around her meridians. He didn't find any abnormalities. Unwilling to give up, he probed again. Again, he only found vigorous vitality. There is no problem. Chu Yang withdrew his hand and scratched his head. No problem? Wu Qingqing was a little uneasy. Then should I continue cultivating? Cultivate. You should be happy that your strength has increased. Why are you panicking? Chu Yang said. He thought to himself, it seems that she was already on the verge of breaking through the 3rd grade of Martial Master. Chuan, now is the time for a breakthrough. Yes, it must be like this. Then, on the next night, Wu Qingqing came again. She wanted to say something but hesitated. What is it? Chu Yang asked. This Chuan, I seem to have broken through again. Wu Qingqing stammered. Huh? Chu Yang was shocked. What grade is it now? Could it be that she advanced from 4th grade to 5th grade in one day? Isn't this too fast? Martial Master grade. Wu Qingqing was flustered. She wanted to cry. What is going on? How can I break through with just one practice? Could there be a problem? Chu Yang was dumbfounded. After a thorough examination, Chu Yang was sure that there was nothing wrong with Wu Qingqing's body. Moreover, the Xianyin revolving technique was also operating normally. He was finally sure, there is nothing wrong. Wu Qingqing left with a heavy heart. Chu Yang also sat down with a heavy heart. So strange. She broke through with just one practice. She broke through with just one practice? Chu Yang was thinking, what is going on? This girl didn't eat any treasures. Wu Qingqing didn't come for 3 days. Chu Yang also let out a sigh of relief. But on that day, after dealing with the Wu Qingruo's attack, Wu Qingqing came again. Chu Yang. What? Chu Yang raised his eyebrows. You didn't break through this time? I broke through to Martial Great Master. Huh? Minister Chu staggered, and almost fell to the ground. Chu Yang had always shocked others with his cultivation speed. Now, he finally had a taste of it himself. In half a month, Wu Qingqing and big sister Wu Qingqing rushed to Martial Great Master grade unstoppably. Towards the end, Chu Yang was shocked until he was numb. It was really too fierce. Later, Chu Yang really couldn't sit still and asked the sword spirit. Then, the sword spirit was also shocked. He asked Chu Yang to call Wu Qingqing over and let him take her pulse. After that, the sword spirit was speechless for a long time. What's wrong? Chu Yang asked anxiously. I can't help it. This is really... The sword spirit said speechlessly. This is really heaven's will. Heaven's will? Chu Yang blinked. This Miss Wu Qingqing actually has the Xian defense body, which is rarely seen in 10,000 years. The sword spirit said speechlessly. And I originally had a few female cultivation techniques here. But for convenience, I took out the one beside me. And this is the most powerful one. Chu Yang asked in confusion. Why? Is it inappropriate? It's not that it's inappropriate, but this technique is completely tailor-made for her. The sword spirit didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You still remember the name of this technique? Xianyin transformation? Pill! It's the Xianyin transformation. The sword spirit sighed. Only after the transformation can one form the Xianyin female body. And this confidant of yours was actually born with the Xianyin body. What do you think is wrong? Chu Yang sucked in a breath of cold air. You mean, she omitted the transfer procedure? The sword spirit nodded speechlessly. That's right. She started cultivating the Xianyin qi. For her, the first half of this technique is equivalent to a smooth path. There are no bottlenecks at all. She just needs to circulate the technique and she can easily advance. Asterisk asterisk. Chu Yang's eyes widened and he couldn't help but swear. Because of his agitation, he actually said this sentence. And at this time, Chu Yang was still taking Wu Qingqing's pulse. This was equivalent to holding her hand and saying, "Fuck! What kind of image was this?" Wu Qingqing's face immediately turned red. She fiercely rolled her eyes at him and raised her eyebrows. "What did you say?" "I cough cough." Chu Yang coughed awkwardly and hurriedly tried to salvage the situation. "I said, fuck, after fuck, my martial power might not be as high as yours, humph." Wu Qingqing rolled her eyes at him. She didn't know what this guy was thinking, so she didn't argue with him. But her face became redder and redder. In Chu Yang's mind, the sword spirit was already laughing. "You're such a hooligan. It's all your fault." Chu Yang flew into a rage out of humiliation. He said fiercely, "Continue." Her advancement now is equivalent to the female Xianyin Qi and her meridians being completely transformed into Xianyin Qi. It's almost over. But after that, she has the yin-yang dual jades in her body. She also has the Xianyin body and can cultivate Xian Qi. This progress can only be described as terrifying. What's the highest level of achievement? Chu Yang asked. Can she become a martial emperor? Martial emperor? The sword spirit disdainfully curled his lips. Martial emperor is nothing. Martial monarch? Martial monarch? Nothing. Asterisk asterisk. Martial saint? Chu Yang's eyes had already turned into bells. Martial fate. The sword spirit muttered. Chu Yang thought that he was going to say martial saint again. Nothing. At this time, the sword spirit finally opened his mouth. If she doesn't break down halfway and by chance, she should be able to cultivate to martial saint, or even higher. It should be possible. But this path is full of difficulties and obstacles. It's easier said than done for a woman to cultivate all the way to the top. Chu Yang was stunned. Martial saint and even higher? Wouldn't that make her a supreme martial artist? His heart automatically ignored the last two sentences. It's a pity that the person who created the revolving Xian technique didn't cultivate to the supreme martial artist level. So, at the final stage, if she wants to go further, she can only create it herself. The sword spirit sighed. Because the creator of this technique, the Xianyin martial fate, didn't have the Xianyin body at the beginning of cultivation. Chu Yang was finally really shocked. Coming back to his senses, he looked at Wu Qingqing, whose face was full of anticipation and uneasiness. He sighed and said, "There's nothing wrong with the technique you're cultivating." But, when Wu Qingqing heard him say but, her heart jumped. She asked, "What's wrong?" "But it's too compatible with your physique. That's why your cultivation speed is so fast." Chu Yang warned seriously. "After this, don't let anyone test your physique. Also, don't tell anyone about the technique you're cultivating. Otherwise, it'll be very difficult for you to grow." "I understand." Wu Qingqing nodded firmly. She asked with a face full of expectation, "Can I cultivate to the martial king level with this technique?" Because in her opinion, the lowest standard to enter the upper three heavens was the martial king level. So she was very concerned about this martial king level. Martial king level. Chu Yang wanted to say, "Maybe you'll be a martial king level after cultivating for half a year." But after thinking about it, he didn't say it. He said, "Absolutely. And it'll be very fast as long as you work hard enough." "I'll work hard." Wu Qingqing clenched her small fist. Chapter 395. Sword Spirit heaved a long sigh and said, "But you have to go to the upper three heavens or the lower three heavens to reach a certain level. But you can't improve in the lower three heavens." Chu Yang frowned. He looked at the pleasantly surprised Wu Qingqing and said, "I will ask for her opinion when the time comes." Wu Qingro had been venting his energy like a madman during this stalemate. Iron Cloud could only passively defend. Tai Longqing felt that this super abnormal phenomenon was very inconceivable. The wind doesn't last forever. The rain doesn't last forever. Diwu Qingro understood this principle. He would get tired and take a break from his indiscriminate bombardment. But Iron Cloud would counterattack at that time, and Diwu Qingro would feel very uncomfortable. Why would this wise man of his generation make such an obvious mistake? Chu Yang didn't feel anything about this. He only calmly looked at his 300,000-strong army. Chu Yang was like an immovable mountain no matter how Diwu Qingro bombarded indiscriminately. He was sure that Diwu Qingro had a plan. Diwu Qingro's decisive battle would come when the dagger would be revealed. Moreover, this was a battle tactic. Both sides were tired. Great Zhao's soldiers were physically tired, but their spirits were high. They could see that their mortal enemy could only let go, and they could attack to their heart's content. As a soldier, this was incomparable to their spirit. On the other hand, Iron Cloud's side was sullen and depressed. They could only withdraw and defend in the face of the enemy's indiscriminate bombardment. They had to use all their strength to prevent their position from being destroyed. How could they not be sullen? But they couldn't act blindly without thinking. Diwu Qingro's army would fiercely gather once there was a gap in the defensive line. Then, they would expand the gap and attack the entire army. Everyone could see this clearly. This was because every time they attacked, they would send out 3 troops from different directions. 2 of the troops would be on the lookout, while the last one would charge and attack. It was obvious that as long as there was even the slightest mistake on your side, the other 2 troops would immediately join in and tear apart the gap. The other attacking troops would have an opportunity to take advantage of the situation if they were to deploy troops from other barracks. Diwu Qingro's battle tactic was crazy and effective. Chu Yang had a faint feeling. Diwu Qingro seems to be deliberately forcing the armies of the 2 countries to a point of eruption. Once they are at the end of their rope, they will fight to the death. Chu Yang had this realization, but he couldn't believe it. Why? Diwu Qingro had no reason to do this. Therefore, he could only slowly continue to speculate, and then steadily deal with the storm-like harassment and attacks of Great Zhao's army. The Great Zhao's army had arrived like a gust of wind. Then, they would disperse like an ebbing tide after a short period of time. And it seemed as if they didn't know what fatigue was. However, the Golden Horse Riders Department's attack that Chu Yang was looking forward to didn't appear. Minister, our army's morale is somewhat unstable. Chu Yang was in the tent when Wu Kuangyun walked in with large strides. He looked somewhat anxious. Everyone is feeling very depressed. If this goes on, when will it end? Is it our brother's morale that is unstable, or is it your morale that is unstable? Chu Yang raised his head and looked at him. Actually, I just came to ask if Taiyuan, the Commander-in-Chief and His Majesty had any instructions. Wu Kuangyun's dark face turned red. Wait. Chu Yang suddenly felt that the morale of the army would plummet if this continued. Wu Kuangyun had a bad temper. But he was also a famous general in the army. So, how could the ordinary troops remain calm if even he was like this? Therefore, some measures must be taken. Chu Yang rolled his eyes. He beckoned Wu Kuangyun to come closer and said, After you go down, do this and this. When the Great Zhao's army comes again, do this and this. Wu Kuangyun beamed with joy. He nodded repeatedly. Then, he gave Chu Yang a thumbs up in admiration. Then, he walked away like a gust of wind. Wu Qingqing couldn't help but tremble behind Chu Yang. She thought, this Chu Yang is really mischievous. He doesn't forget to play pranks in such a battle. That night, a howl was heard along with the sound of hoof beats. The Great Zhao's army was like a pack of wild wolves. At this moment, the Iron Cloud's army suddenly burst into laughter. Ha ha ha. This gang of idiots is here again. Look, this gang of idiots is running back and forth like dogs every night. It's really fucking cool. Brothers, come out and watch the show. Yes, we are just sitting here and waiting for this gang of idiots to act. Motherfucker, it's really cool. It costs money to go to the theater, but it's free here. The Iron Cloud's army suddenly swept away the depressing and dispirited mood of the past few days along with the expansion of this discussion. Everyone started to clamor. Then, the army of thousands of people started to shout loudly. Stupid C*****! You guys are here! Idiots, are you tired? The great Zhao's army had arrived with great momentum. But they were met with such treatment. They immediately flew into a rage. They fought for a while, and both sides suffered casualties. Then they retreated. Then they heard howls behind them. Idiots, are you leaving again? Idiots, come back earlier. The great Zhao's general almost fell off his horse. What's more, under the leadership and encouragement of Wu Kuan-yin, this group of straightforward men worked together to compose a song within half a day. Then, they promoted it throughout the entire army. The song was called Idiots, Are You Tired? The lyrics were as follows: Idiots, are you tired of being driven like a dog every night? Idiots, can you ride a horse? Can you fight a war? Are you tired of being treated like a toy all night? Idiots, are you tired? Oh hey, idiots, although you are bitter, although you are tired, but our hearts are comforted by your hardships every day. Ow, 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 ow. Idiots, you are bitter, you are tired. Idiots, you are a good treasure for us to relax. A good treasure. Thump, 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 thump. Therefore, when the great Zhao's army came again that night, everyone was busy fighting the enemy, but they also built an earthen platform. On the earthen platform, there was a military band of several thousand people. The gongs and drums sounded together, and under the command of the band, 3,000 burly men simultaneously raised their thick necks, and opened their wolf-like voices, and began to sing in a grand and majestic voice. Idiot! Idiot! Are you tired? The surrounding area was heavily guarded. In fact, there was even a special group of guards. Therefore, the singers were only in charge of shouting as loudly as they could. Their voices were like thunder. This was rehearsed. Tens of millions of people were shouting and singing at the same time. And this suppressed the sounds of tens of thousands of people fighting. Therefore, the good Cloud's army was grinning from ear to ear. They were happy as they killed the enemy. Some of them were seriously injured. But they were crying out in pain and laughing at the same time. They were very happy. There was very little entertainment in the military camp. So, everyone was in high spirits now that there was such a good program. Many people were waving their sabers while singing along with the melody. The great Zhao's surprise troops were so angry that their bellies almost burst. They even abandoned their original plan and attacked the earthen platform full of singers. But this operation led to the complete annihilation of the entire army. There were casualties after the battle. But everyone was in high spirits. The usual depressing atmosphere after a battle was swept away. Even the great Zhao's mouths were humming. They were actually looking forward to the great Zhao's idiots' attack that night. Minister Chu's invention had thoroughly solved many problems for the Iron Cloud's army. In just one night, the entire 3 camps of the Iron Cloud were singing. Idiots, are you tired? Idiots singing. The singing became louder and louder. And everyone was fighting with more vigor. There was a soldier who had been slashed in the chest by the enemy. But he tilted his head, looked at the enemy soldier, and said with a smile, Idiots, are you tired? Do you know how comforting I am? These words enraged the great Zhao's soldier. He ferociously rushed forward. I'll let you comfort me. However, this Iron Cloud soldier had a carefree smile on his face. He pulled out a saber from his chest, and stabbed it into his enemy's heart. Iron Cloud had been on the defensive side of this night's offensive and defensive battle. And they had gained the complete upper hand. Moreover, several enemy troops had been left behind. And they had been completely annihilated. In the commander's tent, Tai Longcheng was slapping his thighs and rocking back and forth. He couldn't stop laughing. He smacked his lips. Fuck! This king of hell Chu is really high, ha ha ha! Tai Jitian was on one side. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She was speechless. What could she say? She had nothing to say about Chu Yang's pranks, especially when it came to pranks that only had benefits and no harm. Tai Butian could only choose to cover her ears and not listen. She could only smile bitterly. Tai Jitian had a clear understanding of this. Men are born with a strong tendency to swear, but Tai Butian wasn't in the mood to think about this matter. She was thinking about another problem. A very serious problem. This problem made her flustered. Great Zhao's barracks. Diwu Qingrou's face was serious. He looked a little pale. This situation, where did it first come from? It came from Wu Kuanyun's barracks. That bastard! The general's face was full of hatred. Wu Kuanyun. Diwu Qingrou chuckled. His eyes flashed with a cold light. That's right. According to our previous estimates, King of Hell Chu should be in charge of Wu Kuanyun's army. He smiled faintly. Now, it's exactly the same as my estimates. King of Hell Chu should be in charge of Wu Kuanyun's army. Such a strategy is vulgar and seems naive. But it has a strong effect on raising the morale of the troops. This isn't something that Wu Kuanyun can come up with. King of Hell Chu is behind this. Diwu Qingrou came to an unquestionable conclusion. The generals were dumbfounded. King of Hell Chu? Prime Minister, what should we do next? The generals asked in unison. Mengui, are you ready? Diwu Qingrou asked. Chapter 396. Good! Diwu Qingrou's eyes flashed with a ruthless light as he said. In that case, tonight's raid will be the last time. Dispatch the Golden Horse Riders Department and give Iron Cloud a heavy blow. Then, immediately withdraw the troops. Withdraw the troops? The generals turned pale with fright. Yes, withdraw the troops. Once the raid is over, immediately withdraw the troops. Leave the tents here. Don't touch anything else. It's enough to completely withdraw the troops, Diwu Qingrou said casually. Yes. The generals didn't understand, but they knew that Diwu Qingrou had a brilliant plan. Their blind trust in Diwu Qingrou made them execute his orders without hesitation. Order the infantry to withdraw immediately. When the cavalry comes back, wrap the horses' hooves with cotton and quietly withdraw, Diwu Qingrou added. Make sure no one knows. Prime Minister, isn't this too hasty? If we hastily withdraw, we will have to go over this mountain. And once this mountain is occupied by the enemy, it will mean that our 10 years of expeditions will be in vain. Moreover, Iron Cloud will have one more natural stronghold. This will be very detrimental to Great Zhao's unification plan. The Heavenly Dragon General Yuhan frowned. Dragon General Li also nodded on the side. He agreed with His Majesty and Yuhan's words. Hasty, it must be hasty. If everything needs to be planned before acting, I'm afraid Iron Cloud will react at that time. Especially King of Hell Chu. I'm afraid the entire strategy will change once he reacts. Diwu Qingrou's eyes flashed as he said. Yuhan, you should know what I mean about this retreat. Why are you still asking? But the military's morale will inevitably be shaken. Moreover, if we attack back, the casualties will be very heavy. It will be equivalent to perishing together with the enemy. Yuhan's thin face was somewhat heavy and sad. The Golden Horse Riders Department had been constantly making arrangements. How could Yuhan not know what they were doing? Yuhan's body was covered in cold sweat when he saw those vicious arrangements. The enemy had fallen into the trap. But his side didn't have much protection. It was bound to perish together. How could this heavenly dragon, who had always loved his troops, feel comfortable? Therefore, for the first time in his life, he questioned Diwu Qingrou's orders. You only need to carry out the orders. Diwu Qingrou looked at him gently and said, Yuhan, sacrifices are inevitable in war. Yuhan heaved a long sigh. That night, Great Zhao's attack was even more ferocious. It seemed as if they were covering the sky and covering the earth. Moreover, they didn't stop for the entire night. However, Iron Cloud's side had already recovered. Moreover, along with this violent attack, it clearly conveyed a thought. It seems that this kind of attack is about to stop. Tai Longqing was in the commander's tent. His brows wrinkled as he listened to the sounds of the heaven-shaking bandits outside. Several of his trusted generals were by his side. Diwu Qingrou's attack had stopped. This meant that the time for Iron Cloud to counterattack had arrived. Therefore, the generals could not wait any longer. It won't be that simple. Tai Longqing faintly felt that Di Wuqingro definitely had more tricks up his sleeve. He waved his hand and said, "Let's wait until dawn." In the face of Di Wuqingro's unpredictable strategy, Tai Longqing did not dare to take any risks. He would rather give up this great opportunity than act blindly without thinking. In addition, immediately report this situation to His Majesty and Minister Chu. Let's see what they have to say. Tai Longqing made a decision. If the enemy retreats after dawn, and His Majesty and Minister Chu have no objections, we will immediately pursue and attack. On the other side, Chu Yang had been standing on the top of the flagpole when the chaos had just started. He had been quietly watching for a while. Then, he had come down with a heavy expression on his face. If he had guessed correctly, perhaps Di Wuqingro would reveal his true intentions tonight. However, he did not know what kind of arrangements this ambitious and ruthless man would make. He came down and saw Wu Qianqian standing beside the commander's tent. She was dressed in black. Her long hair and sleeves were fluttering in the wind. "Tonight should come to an end," Wu Qingqing said in a low voice. "Huh!" Chu Yang looked at her. "I can feel Di Wuqingro's determination in this attack," Wu Qingqing casually said. "There are 3 reasons. First, Di Wuqingro did not prepare an army camp tonight. Second, Di Wuqingro's total number of troops is close to 1 million if we calculate according to the number of troops he has invested. This is equivalent to a semi-decisive battle. However, it is taking place in the dark night. So, people can't feel the flavor of a decisive battle. As for the last reason, it is my feeling." Chu Yang looked at Wu Qingqing with some gratification. Wu Qingqing could see this point. It showed that she had matured in all aspects. She could take charge of a whole area alone. Especially the last sentence that Wu Qingqing had said with a very certain tone. "My feeling." It was a kind of telepathy that belonged to a decision-making person. This was already an outstanding and powerful ability. Especially when the opponent was Di Wuqingro. This was even rarer. "What would you do if you were Di Wuqingro?" Chu Yang probed. "If I were him, I would immediately attack after tonight's decisive battle if I could expand the results of the battle. If I couldn't, I would retreat immediately. Although this battlefield is big, it can't accommodate 8 million people at the same time. 1 million for each side is already the limit. Tonight is a semi-decisive battle. However, it will decide the outcome of the battle and the direction of the war. It can happen tonight, and it certainly can happen in the future. Therefore, I would retreat and plan slowly. I would conserve my forces and make a comeback. This is the best plan." Wu Qingqing paused and said, "However, the elite cavalry of Golden Horse Riders Department hasn't appeared yet. This is my concern. If they don't appear, Di Wuqingro will have other ideas. If they appear and can't capture Iron Cloud's camp by daybreak, they will retreat. You've seen half of it." Chu Yang looked at her happily. He praised, "But it's already not easy. The only half that I haven't seen is Di Wuqingro's character and Di Wuqingro's insidious arrangements. Di Wuqingro is not a person who gives up easily. If he wants to give up, there must be a reason. If he wants to withdraw, there must be a backup plan." Chu Yang said slowly. "Therefore, even if Di Wuqingro wants to withdraw, it will only be a trap." "Trap?" Wu Qingqing asked in confusion. "Yes, have you seen the camps of both sides?" Chu Yang asked himself in his heart. At the same time, he recalled Di Wuqingro's arrangements on the roof of the Prime Minister's manor. He slowly calculated. His words also became more and more intermittent as he continued to calculate. "Our Iron Cloud side has a majestic pass to the north and steep mountains on both sides. We can attack and retreat. Moreover, we don't have to worry about the rear. But Di Wuqingro only needs to break through from the front. His path will be smooth." "Yes." Wu Qingqing looked at Chu Yang in bewilderment. She thought, "Isn't this something that everyone knows?" But look at Diwu Qingrou's tough self. He has clearly put out a dragon coiling and tiger entrenched in the wind. Looking from afar, it looked like a huge dragon was coiling over, but it was holding its head high. Moreover, behind the dragon's body is a tiger's body. When the dragon moves, the wind and clouds gather. When the tiger roars, the fierce tiger comes down from the mountain. This is the posture of swallowing iron cloud in one fell swoop. This proves that Diwu Qingrou has made up his mind to fight when he came here. How can he retreat so easily? Chu Yang frowned. He seemed to be asking Wu Qingqing, but also seemed to be asking himself. But there is one thing that is very strange. Originally, Great Owl's camp was further forward. But after Diwu Qingrou arrived, they unknowingly retreated 18 miles. Most of the main camp spread to the flat slope halfway up the mountain. Moreover, it changed from a horizontal formation to a square formation. In other words, after Diwu Qingrou arrived, it became a dragon coiling and tiger entrenched camp. This shows that Diwu Qingrou wants to take advantage of the terrain. Chu Yang rubbed his eyebrows and said with difficulty. He paused every time he said a sentence. It was as if he was pouring out his heart and lungs to analyze. This kind of analysis consumed a lot of energy. It was unimaginable. Especially analyzing the thoughts of the ambitious and ruthless Diwu Qingrou, it was even more difficult. Setting up camp at the back of the mountain means that Great Zhao has an endless supply of food. This is a safe method. Moreover, by retreating 18 miles, we can avoid the exhaustion of transporting grain. How can this be called a conspiracy? Wu Qingqing frowned in contemplation and raised an objection. You did not see the terrain clearly. Chu Yang pulled Wu Qingqing into the tent and came to the sand table. Pointing at the terrain on the sand table, he said, Look, Diwu Qingrou set up camp here. It is foolproof. Look at the mountain behind him. The terrain of the mountain. It's very flat. This is also the condition created for the supply team. Even if we retreat, there will be no danger. This is a perfect plan. Wu Qingqing stared at the sand table with her pretty eyes. What if this mountain is Iron Cloud's team? Chu Yang pointed at the mountain and asked. If Iron Cloud's team is there, then attacking Diwu Qingrou would be as easy as blowing off dust. Wu Qingqing was very puzzled. How could Iron Cloud's team appear there? If they could, then the war would have ended long ago. This mountain is not high, but the terrain is very flat. There is no big slope. It is suitable for cavalry to charge. If the infantrymen are on high ground, they can display 3 times the fighting strength. As for the archers, spear throwers, knife throwers, and axe throwers, it is the best place to use their skills. Once they attack from the top of the mountain and attack Diwu Qingrou's camp, they will be meat on the chopping board. They can be slaughtered at will. Even turning around and running away will become an extravagant hope. Because running away in a hurry will not be as fast as the opponent's speed. Chu Yang spoke faster and faster. If Diwu Qingrou deliberately creates a situation where they run away in panic, will we chase after them? Of course we will chase. Wu Qingqing said without hesitation. But what if Diwu Qingrou set up an ambush on the top of the mountain? Chu Yang asked. When our army enters Iron Cloud's camp to collect supplies, they will suddenly attack like a tiger coming down from the mountain. Wu Qingqing suddenly broke out in cold sweat. Chapter 397. Zhuge Clan! Chu Yang's body shook. He had already guessed that Diwu Qingrou was a member of the Zhuge clan, which was one of the big ruling clans of the upper 3 heavens. However, he still felt somewhat shaken when he heard Diwu Qingrou admitted himself. You may not be familiar with the surname Diwu. Diwu Qingrou smiled bitterly. But the glory of our Diwu clan is incomparable to that of the Zhuge clan. Diwu clan? Chu Yang frowned and racked his brains. But he still couldn't figure it out. He said, Please enlighten me. The Zhuge clan had 10,000 years of glory and was already a big shot in the entire heavenly layer. But who would remember that our Diwu clan had 20,000 years of glory before the Zhuge clan? It's been 30,000 years since then. Diwu Qingru smiled bitterly, but his voice was still soft. Our Diwu clan was the dominant clan chosen by the 7th generation Tribulation Sword Master. And it was the most important and resourceful clan among the dominant clans. Among the big clans, it was ranked 5th. 10,000 years later, our clan's glory was still the same. Our ancestor Diwu Qingru was born in the heavenly layer, and he was outstanding. Plus, he was very friendly with the 7th generation Tribulation Sword Master. So, 8 of the big clans declined under the Tribulation Sword, but our Diwu clan flourished for another 10,000 years. I see. Chu Yang sighed. So this involves an ancient divine item like the Tribulation Sword. A clan with tens of thousands of years. It's really unimaginable. Diwu Qingru smiled slightly. His eyes flashed, and he continued. The 8th generation Tribulation Sword Master was born, and the world was turned upside down again. The Diwu clan finally declined, and the new one to replace it was the Zhuge clan. I see. Chu Yang sighed. What a pity! And the remaining people of my Diwu clan were only 2 or 3 youngsters. The others, including several martial saints and dozens of martial monarchs, were all buried in the Tribulation Sword. 10,000 years of inheritance was destroyed overnight. We had no choice but to live under someone else's roof and be taken in as slaves by the Zhuge clan. Servant. Chu Qin sucked in a cold breath. However, after thousands of years of evolution, our Diwu clan was an intelligent clan after all. Although we couldn't rise again, we succeeded in getting rid of our slave status and became a servant of the Zhuge clan. Furthermore, his position was gradually stabilizing. In the last 1,000 years, he was already able to attend the academy with his clan's younger brothers. He could dabble in anything, whether it was martial arts or military strategy. Diwu Qingru's eyes lit up. Chu Yang remained silent. This was because he was thinking about Diwu Qingru's words. These words had shaken his mind. Several saint-level ancestors and dozens of monarch-level experts were all buried in the calamity. Saint-level. Monarch rank. If Diwu Qingru's words were true, then there would be many hidden powerhouses in the upper 3 heavens. When the Diwu clan was destroyed, several martial saints and dozens of martial monarchs died, and this was just one family. However, he would have to face all the ruling clans of the upper 3 heavens in the future. This was the fate of the Calamity Sword Master. Fuck! Chu Yang's heart beat wildly. My surname is Diwu. When I was born, my father named me Qing Tian. Diwu Qing Tian. Diwu Qingru smiled gently. It seemed as if he was talking about someone else's matter. The Zhuge clan's younger brothers are divided into 2 lines. Although we all cultivate martial arts, there is a strict rule. Cultivators can't be stained with blood. Use wisdom to conquer the world. Use wisdom to cut off karma. Diwu Qingru laughed. Although the Zhuge clan has many strong cultivators in the past 10,000 years, they can only use their wisdom to solve problems. They can't use their martial arts. In this way, under such pressure, all the Zhuge clan's cultivators try their best to develop their brains. Of course, they become smarter and smarter. I understand. Chu Yang really understood. He had to admit that the Zhuge clan's ancestor was really far-sighted. Such a decision was simply wise to the extreme, because it could ensure that the Zhuge clan's intelligence would become higher and higher from generation to generation. Martial arts complemented each other. That is the only way to prosper forever. You only have extremely powerful martial strength, and no wisdom. You can only be used as a tool in the hands of others. A person who didn't know a word could become a strong martial artist, but he would never become a wise man. This was the fundamental difference between a wise man and a martial artist. The overbearing way of martial arts is gentleness, Diwu Qingru said. Every generation of cultivators is an outstanding younger brother of the clan. And in the clan, their status is also very high. So, after the clan chose me as a cultivator, they changed my name to Diwu Qingru. They used the name Qingru to remind me of my identity as a cultivator. Diwu Qingru smiled faintly. I see. Chu Yan nodded. Only now did he understand why a man like Diwu Qingro would use such a gentle name. 30 years ago, when the 10,000-year period was approaching, the 5 wise men of the Zhuge clan activated a secret technique. The 5 wise men exhausted their efforts and paid the price of the 5 men's lives. They clearly calculated that the next Master of Calamity Sword was about to come out, but the fate of the Zhuge clan was not optimistic. So, they wanted to go against the heavens and change. Diwu Qingro said. Go against the heavens and change fate. Chu Yang was really shocked this time. It turned out that he was not the only one in the world who had this idea. Or it should be said that we need to follow the heavens' fate, but we need to borrow fate. Diwu Qingro thought for a while and finally slowly explained again. And this requires the fate of the lower 3 heavens to complement. Do you understand? Chu Yang nodded. It is to extract the fate of a country through a certain method to your Zhuge clan. If it goes well, it can continue for another 10,000 years, right? Yes. Diwu Qingro looked at Chu Yang in amazement. And this is the reason why you, Diwu Qingro, came to Great Xiao. Is that right? Chu Yang asked. Yes. Diwu Qingro said. Simply put, it is to overturn the whole world with one person's strength. Moreover, it must be so huge that even the Emperor's dragon energy cannot suppress it. Then, through this person, the entire clan's wise men will set up a fate channel and extract it directly from the firmament with the power of the stars at the cost of this person's life and spiritual energy. This mission has fallen on my shoulders. Because once it is done, this person's life will be sharply reduced, and it is not impossible that he will die. The ordinary clan's younger brothers still care about their own lives, but I, Diwu Qingro, have the ambition to conquer the world. As long as I can unify the world in my hands, even if I die immediately, so what? How many years can a person live in this life? If I don't do anything, would I live up to my peerless talent? Moreover, at that time, I was also looking at the star's fortune technique. But I comprehended a strange technique that others can't comprehend, and that is the stargazing technique. I could accurately grasp the general trend of the world. Although this is limited to the Emperor's star technique, it was very beneficial to this plan. Diwu Qingro heaved a heavy sigh as he said this. So what if it is the Emperor's star technique? So what if it is accurate? The weather changes at the most critical time. So, my master and I came to the lower 3 heavens when we were 20 years old. My master vomited blood and died in order to set up a formation to absorb fate. But before he died, he had a burst of inspiration and adopted an orphan. That orphan was my junior brother. At that time, my master's last words were, "My junior brother will help me complete this task, and then he will die." Only my junior brother and I were left, and we depended on each other. I taught my junior brother wholeheartedly, and looked for opportunities. Finally, 5 years later, the weather changed, and Great Xiao became the master of the world. So I came to Great Xiao with a bumpy road, and slowly worked my way up. My junior brother was always hidden in the dark, and when I had a firm foothold, he left me and went to Iron Cloud. Diwu Qingro's eyes revealed a trace of pain. But he was killed by you. Killed by me? Chu Yang was surprised. Who? Tang Xian Xing. Diwu Qingro looked at Chu Yang with a malicious gaze and said word by word. That was my junior brother. Eh? Chu Yang was stunned, and then his heart suddenly became cold. Because he remembered Diwu Qingro's words, before my master died, he adopted an orphan, and that orphan was my junior brother. My master's last words were, "My junior brother will help me complete this task." This ability to calculate could be said to be heaven-defying. Chu Yang clearly remembered that in his previous life, Diwu Qingro dominated Great Xiao, and the most difficult bone to chew, Iron Cloud, was completely destroyed by Diwu Qingro and Tang Xian Xing. It could be said that Tang Xian Xing really helped Diwu Qingro complete his most difficult task. Diwu Qingro's master actually calculated this before his death. This made Chu Yang's heart become even more fearful of the Zhuge clan's wise men. They really had the ability to see through heaven's secrets. Wu Qingro seemed to know what Chu Yang was thinking, and said casually, "You don't have to worry. This ability comes at the cost of one's life." His eyes revealed a hint of mockery. "There are many people in the world, but I have never seen someone who is willing to sacrifice his life when he is living well." "So, you are also not willing?" Chu Yang asked sensitively. "I have ambitions and aspirations." Wu Qingro was silent for a while, and then said casually, "But I also have a family. And I am only a retainer." Chu Yang let out a long "oh" sound. "You also know my origin, and you also know my identity," Wu Qingro said. "So, I came here tonight to be open and honest." "Yes," Chu Yang admitted. "And I guess that you will not fight with me for a long time in this war." Wu Qingro's eyes suddenly became very meaningful as he said this. "That is not necessarily true." Chu Yang's heart moved, and he said with a smile, "Fast people have fast ways of fighting, slow people have slow ways of fighting. I don't care." Wu Qingro chuckled and said, "Now, there is an opportunity in front of you to end this war in a very short time. At this point, everyone can write their own guesses in the book review. I need to draw on everyone's wisdom, so please feel free to comment." Chapter 398. "You mean, tonight?" Chu Yang's eyes narrowed. "I can see the Emperor Star technique." Wu Qingru smiled. "And this time, the Emperor Star shines in the world and stands in Iron Cloud. So, no matter how long the war lasts, the winner will be Iron Cloud. Even if I have the ability, I can't change the destiny." Chu Yang raised his eyebrows and looked at Wu Qingru in surprise. He didn't expect Wu Qingru to be so frank. He said, "You can see the final outcome?" "Yes." Wu Qingru smiled deeply. "That's why I came today." Chu Yang smiled. Yes, if Wu Qingru was sure of victory, he wouldn't have come here today. "Tell me your conditions," Chu Yang said casually. "Now you know that although luck is illusory, it's very important to the clan. Not only does the Zhuge clan need luck." Wu Qingru smiled meaningfully. "Our Wu clan also needs luck." "Luck?" Chu Yang pondered and said frankly. "But I don't understand what you're talking about." "You don't need to pretend to understand, I understand." Wu Qingru smiled gently. At this time, the fighting sounds outside had gradually decreased. It seemed that the enemy was retreating. But Chu Yang didn't think about this at all. Wu Qingru didn't seem to care either. It seemed that he wasn't worried at all about being alone in the enemy camp with hundreds of thousands of troops. After a long time, Chu Yang smiled faintly. "You're right, but I don't feel at ease if I do as you say. Because I don't trust you." He stared intently at Wu Qingru. Then, he smiled and said, "Unless you can give me a reason to be completely at ease." "I'm here today to give you this reason," Wu Qingru said calmly. "Luck is very important, and the Zhuge clan's luck is extracted from Great Xiao. But after this war, Great Xiao won't exist." He smiled meaningfully and said, "So, the Zhuge clan won't be able to extract luck this time." Chu Yang nodded faintly, but his mind was spinning rapidly as he pondered. "So, when the Tribulation Sword Master ascends to the upper three heavens, the Zhuge clan will be in trouble," Wu Qingru said slightly. "I don't understand." Chu Yang shook his head blankly and said, "Even if the Tribulation Sword Master appears and ascends to the upper three heavens, the Zhuge clan may not necessarily be unlucky. As long as these clans are modest and cautious, and don't offend people easily, it wouldn't be difficult for them to become friends with the Tribulation Sword Master. Even if they don't interfere with each other's business, the Tribulation Sword Master won't easily destroy a large clan, right?" "Ha!" Wu Qingru couldn't help but laugh. "Minister Chu, if you can say these words, then it can be said that you are an upright person even though your wisdom is outstanding, and your conduct is strange, and your methods are sinister." Chu Yang touched his nose awkwardly. He really didn't understand why he would say that. "The birth of the Tribulation Sword Master is a reshuffle of the heavenly layers," Wu Qingru said casually, But why is there a reshuffle? This is the truth of the heavenly Tao. Why do you want to shuffle the cards? Chu Yang asked. He had a vague feeling that something was amiss, but he wasn't sure about it. Therefore, he decided to take advantage of this opportunity to get to the bottom of it. Why do countries and dynasties need to be replaced? Diwu Qingro asked back. Then he answered himself. That's because the previous dynasty had already decayed. So, it had to be eliminated. The heavenly layers are the same. Chu Yang nodded. That's true. Any clan that has been in power for 10,000 years will breed many malignant tumors, and these malignant tumors are often fatal. Yes, that's the reason. Diwu Qingro nodded deeply. The Tribulation Sword Master will never provoke the Zhuge clan, but the Zhuge clan will definitely provoke the Tribulation Sword Master. No matter how many times the family had given out orders, the things that were supposed to happen would definitely happen. And once it happens, the Tribulation Sword Master won't be able to accept a peaceful solution. In the end, the conflict will only intensify and become more and more intense. When the Zhuge clan knows that the other party is the Tribulation Sword Master, things will have reached a point where even the heavenly Tao can't reverse it. Diwu Qingro smiled deeply and said, This is fate, this is fate. And the Tribulation Sword Master is the origin of fate. So, things will never stop happening around him. He doesn't have to cause trouble, but trouble will always find him. Diwu Qingro's gaze was profound. Even if he were to sleep at home, someone would certainly tear down his house and force him to seek revenge, to seek justice, and to demand an explanation. And this explanation is not something that can be achieved peacefully. It requires force. And force will lead to death. And death will lead to more and more problems. Diwu Qingro smiled mysteriously and said, Do you know why? No, Chu Yang said honestly. In the Heavenly Layers continent, this is called tribulation, which corresponds to the word tribulation in the Tribulation Sword. Diwu Qingro chuckled. But in terms of techniques, this is called heart effect, and the Tribulation Sword Master is the heart. If the Heavenly Layers continent is a play, then the Tribulation Sword Master is the main character. Diwu Qingro's eyes were cold, and a sharp light flashed. He said insidiously, And the main character will never have a smooth journey. I see. Chu Yang nodded deeply and said, So, all these can only be described with one word, Heavenly Tao. Am I right? Diwu Qingro laughed. Exactly. His sharp eyes swept around and saw Wu Qianqian. He revealed a mysterious smile and said, Minister Chu, let me give you an example. If you were the master of Tribulation Sword, you didn't do anything at home, and you didn't offend anyone. But suddenly, a lecherous young master appeared. And this lecherous young master kidnapped this beautiful Miss Wu. Let me ask you, would you let him go? Without waiting for Chu Yang to speak, Diwu Qingro interrupted. Even if this lecherous young master has a dominant clan behind him, and his father is the leader of the number one clan, will you let him go? Chu Yang was stunned, and then he said fiercely, Fuck! How can I let him go so easily? Wu Qianqian's face turned red. Isn't that right? This is fate, Diwu Qingro said calmly. It's called fate for ordinary people. They can only accept their fate. But it's called tribulation for the Tribulation Sword Master. It's the tribulation of the big clan that the lecherous young master belongs to. Diwu Qingro had been talking about conditions and expanding the topic, but he didn't because Chu Yang changed the topic. But Diwu Qingro wasn't anxious or impatient at all. Instead, he tried his best to explain and dispel Chu Yang's doubts. This point was very bizarre. Diwu Qingro was patient and far-sighted, but he shouldn't be so patient with Chu Yang. I see. The heavens revolves around the Tribulation Sword. Chu Yang let out a long breath. Maybe there's a ruler above the heavens, which is the heaven's will. But in this heavens, the Tribulation Sword is the ruler. Exactly, Diwu Qingro said solemnly. The two didn't speak for a long time. How do you want to cooperate this time? Chu Yang asked. This time, he took the initiative to mention it, which could be considered as returning the favor. When I came to the lower three heavens, I secretly learned the fate transfer channel because I was extra careful. I set up a small one myself. Diwu Qingro smiled and said, although it's small, it used up all the materials that our Diwu clan had accumulated for 10,000 years. Oh? Chu Yang raised his eyebrows. Of course, we didn't dare to compete with the Zhuge clan for Great Gao's fate. At that time, I thought that even if Iron Cloud lost, it still had the noble emperor's aura. At that time, this noble emperor's aura would dissipate between heaven and earth. And the Zhuge clan obviously didn't care about the remaining fate of these losers. So, it was better to let our Diwu clan take advantage of it. What's more, such a small formation has a very small impact on my lifespan. It's only 30 years, and I can afford these 30 years. Diwu Qingro said. So, if Iron Cloud wins, our Diwu clan's days will be much better. Of course, I have to escape the Zhuge clan's punishment for my failure first before I can talk about other things. I see. Chu Yang took a deep breath. Chu Yang sucked in a breath of cold air. I didn't expect that Diwu Qingro had secretly set up this chess piece without anyone knowing. This guy really wanted to leave behind a backup plan no matter the situation. But this way, I'm also in danger. Diwu Qingro smiled bitterly. Because I only plan to collect the remaining fate. So I naturally set it up casually. But Iron Cloud is going to win. This is equivalent to heavens were playing with me ruthlessly. When the Tribulation Sword Master dominates the heavens, if the Diwu clan really absorbs the fate of Iron Cloud, then I, Diwu Qingro, will disappear from this world. And the origin of this is the small formation I set up back then. Isn't such an outcome a joke by nature? It's unexpected. Diwu Qingro looked up to the sky and sighed. Chu Yang was also very surprised. He was just admiring Diwu Qingro's unpredictable methods. He didn't expect that things would turn out like this in the blink of an eye. But Diwu Qingro's life is worth it for the sake of my Diwu clan's longevity. Diwu Qingro insipidly said. But this time, the arrangement is indeed somewhat grandiose, because the formation of this destiny, especially this kind of destiny that can only be generated by the rise and fall of a nation, needs to have soaring blood energy. Soaring blood energy? Chu Yang was expressionless. He thought, no wonder Diwu Qingro started the war so quickly. But this time, I attacked openly and retreated secretly. This is somewhat superficial. You will see the flaw, and may not plan it. Diwu Qingro said lightly. This way, there may not be a decisive battle. If we retreat, then we won't have enough fate. Because Great Xiao will weaken day by day, and Iron Cloud will be like the sun. It will slowly prosper. When it develops to the end, it will become a gradual encroachment. Then, there won't be any battle spirit left. Chapter 399. Chu Yang's complexion remained calm. Your Iron Cloud's army will launch a surprise attack tomorrow morning. Then, I will immediately return to the army to fight a decisive battle. And I will give you, King of Hell Chu, a glorious victory. Diwu Qingro said word by word. I will owe you a big favor today. What if I say no? Chu Yang asked expressionlessly. Then, I will immediately lead the army back to Great Xiao. I, Diwu Qingro, won't be able to destroy Iron Cloud in my lifetime. But Iron Cloud won't be able to unify the world. That way, I won't face any imminent disaster. At least I, Diwu Qingro, can live for 200 or 300 years with my martial power. But I don't know if Minister Chu can afford to wait for 200 or 300 years. Diwu Qingro raised his head and looked at Chu Yang. He slowly said each word. Chu Yang stood up. His face was gloomy as he slowly walked forward. He frowned. There was no doubt that Diwu Qingro's previous preparations were all for this one condition. Moreover, this condition had hit Chu Yang's weakest point. 200 or 300 years. Could Chu Yang afford to wait if this situation continued for 200 or 300 years? He couldn't afford to wait. He couldn't afford to wait no matter how he looked at it. However, these were the lives of 8 million soldiers. If Chu Yang accepted Di Wuqingrou's proposal, then the war would end, and the world would be decided. And he would have completed his first big step in reversing the heavens. He would have been able to leave the lower 3 heavens and go to the place he had longed for a long time. His lover was still in the abyss of suffering there. She was waiting for him to save her. His good brothers were fighting a bloody battle for a common future. His master was waiting for him there. Chu Yang wanted to go there. But Chu Yang couldn't afford to pay the price of 8 million people. It was normal for people to die in an ordinary war. Chu Yang wouldn't have felt any psychological burden if Di Wuqingrou hadn't come here first. He would have killed millions of people with his own hands if the decisive battle happened today. Because this was war. It was an unstoppable war. Either you die or I die. But Di Wuqingrou came. He told Chu Yang his plan, the direction of the war, and its outcome. It was equivalent to 2 people plotting for the same goal. This was equivalent to 2 people conspiring to kill 8 million people. Chu Yang couldn't afford to pay such a price. Di Wuqingrou seemed to have noticed Chu Yang's urgency. He calmly waited for Chu Yang's reply after he raised this condition. "Why do you think that I won't be able to wait?" Chu Yang muttered. "Even if Great Xiao has Di Wuqingrou, you won't be able to last for 200 or 300 years. If you really retreat, then in 30 to 50 years I have absolute confidence that I can destroy Great Xiao. But 30 to 50 years. Can you afford to wait?" Di Wuqingrou didn't deny it. Instead, he asked. He didn't wait for Chu Yang to speak. Instead, he smiled gently and said, "Ever since you came to Iron Cloud, all of your methods have been swift and decisive. Your methods are Reiho's methods, but not the way to rule a country. Actually, you can use a gentler method for everything. That way, there won't be any side effects. You don't know what methods you're not using," Di Wuqingrou casually said. "As for Great Xiao, you didn't need to go, but you still went." He pondered and looked at Chu Yang. "I always feel that all your actions contain a very strong sense of purpose. I don't know your purpose, but I know that your world isn't in lower 3 heavens." He looked at Chu Yang. Chu Yang also looked at him quietly for a long time. Di Wuqingrou said, "You're looking forward to a bigger world. A world that belongs to you. So, don't talk about 30 to 50 years. You can't even wait for 3 to 5 years." Behind Chu Yang, Wu Qianqian's delicate body trembled. As the person who understood Chu Yang the most, she knew that Di Wuqingrou's guess was no longer a guess. It was a fact. "So, I launched a decisive battle ahead of time. You shouldn't oppose it. But more people will die than expected." Di Wuqingrou exposed a cruel smile. "I'm curious why you made such a change." Chu Yang frowned. "You said that the destiny of your clan is one of the reasons. But I don't believe that it's the only reason." Di Wuqingrou remained silent for a long time. Then, he finally said, "I didn't expect the Diwu clan to rise again at that time. I came to lower 3 heavens so that my talent and knowledge wouldn't be buried. I also wanted to be a meritorious minister. Even if I'm a powerful minister, as long as I unify the world, I'll naturally be immortalized. What I seek is nothing more than a false reputation," Di Wuqingrou said in disappointment. "But I didn't expect that the weather would change just as I was about to succeed. And my life's work would go down the drain. In other words, even the heavens don't want me, Di Wuqingrou, to be immortalized for eternity." His eyes emitted a dazzling radiance. He spoke slowly and softly in an elegant and frightening tone. "Since I can't be immortalized for eternity, I'll go down in infamy for 10,000 years. If I can't be immortalized for eternity, then I'll be infamy for eternity. So, I deliberately set up this killing trap." Di Wuqingrou looked at Chu Yang and slowly said, "Do you agree or not? It's easy for you and for me. As for the 8 million soldiers," Di Wuqingrou insipidly said, "the lifespan of an ant isn't long. This decision is too crazy. I won't agree to it," Chu Yang said indifferently. His eyes exposed a trace of pain as he said, 8 million people, will be buried by my hands. I can't bear to do this. Diwu Qingro looked at him for a long time before he said, King of Hell Chu, King of Hell rewards the good and punishes the evil. Chu Yang said with an expressionless face, I can kill 8 million people on my own if the war breaks out. And that's because they want to kill me. But I, Chu Yang, disdain to do such a thing. Then do you know that Great Zhao will withdraw its troops if I leave today? Then, it will be a war of at least 30 to 50 years. Diwu Qingro said. The war will inevitably continue for 30 to 50 years. It won't produce any bloody luck. But the total number of people who will die in the war will be far greater than 8 million. You think that you are being charitable today. So you let go of the lives of 8 million people. But you will have to pay the price of at least 10 million casualties in the future. Aren't those living creatures? Diwu Qingro asked aggressively. Those are living creatures. But I will have a clear conscience. Chu Yan smiled faintly and said, But I will have a guilty conscience if I conspire with my enemy to kill my own soldiers, even if it's just one of them. I want a clear conscience. I won't hesitate to wield my sword as long as I have a magnanimous heart. I won't hesitate to kill everyone in the heavenly layer as long as I think it's right. Chu Yang seemed to have untied the knot in his heart. He suddenly said with a clear voice, But I won't go against my heart and plot against my own people, even if it's just a strand of hair. This is King of Hell Chu's bottom line, Chu Yang said proudly. This mental barrier was suddenly removed. Chu Yang suddenly felt that the cultivation of his mental state had improved by another step. Clap, clap, clap! Diwu Qingro gently clapped his hands and praised. You are indeed King of Hell Chu. You are worthy of being called a maverick. Suddenly, the ground started to shake at this moment. Chu Yang's complexion changed. His eyes turned sharp as he looked at Diwu Qingro. Diwu Qingro sighed and said, You don't want this. But I still want to give you this glorious victory. Moreover, I still owe you a favor. This matter is indeed somewhat sullen. Chu Yang's complexion changed. The sound of the ground shaking was very far away. But it lasted for a long time. This was clearly the sound of a 1,000,000-strong army moving out. They have already started the pursuit? Chu Yang asked somewhat blankly. If I'm not mistaken, then Tai Butian and Tai Longcheng's 3,000,000-strong army have already entered the battlefield apart from your 300,000 soldiers. Diwu Qingro chuckled. Minister Chu, there have been many topics since I arrived, but I have paused for every topic. Diwu Qingro sat calmly. He smiled and said, You have spoken 170 sentences since I arrived. But it only took you half an hour. But in order to deal with your 170 sentences, I spoke 421 sentences. And it took me 3 hours. Diwu Qingro said. 4 hours have passed. Moreover, it's daybreak. These 4 hours are enough for Tai Longqing to react and launch the pursuit. Diwu Qingro chuckled. Chu Yang's complexion turned cold. He was about to rush out. They have already set out. And they have already stepped into my trap. It's too late even if you rush out now. Minister Chu, your 300,000 soldiers will decide the outcome of this battle, so it's better not to act blindly without thinking. Diwu Qingro said indifferently. Chu Yang was about to take a step forward when he stopped. He suddenly turned his head and looked at Diwu Qingro. His pupils shrank dangerously. You schemed against me? I schemed against you. Shouldn't I? Diwu Qingro chuckled. Moreover, I wanted to give you a big gift. Chu Yang slowly sat down. He calmed down and said, But how can you be sure that Tai Longqing will attack? That's because Tai Longqing is the supreme commander. But you have the right to make the decision, Diwu Qingro said. Tai Longqing is supporting Iron Cloud on his own. He has worked hard and made great contributions. Tai Butian won't have any objection to Tai Longqing's decision. He is the person Tai Butian trusts the most. Moreover, he trusts him blindly. Therefore, there's no need to be afraid of this uncle and nephew pair. Di Wuqing Rose sighed. This was my greatest assurance in defeating Iron Cloud. But it has now become a blessing for Iron Cloud. Haha, the will of the heavens is unpredictable. Tai Longqing will eventually step into my plan. And Tai Butian will also step into my plan if he steps in. Only you can turn the tide. Therefore, the variable in this entire plan is you. Di Wuqing Ro casually said. Therefore, I didn't come here tonight to discuss conditions with you. Instead, I came here to entangle you for 4 hours. He smiled and said, with the status of Di Wuqing Ro, it is not difficult for me to entangle you for 4 hours. But the overall situation is already set in stone in these 4 hours. Even if you are the master of Calamity Sword, you won't be able to reverse the situation. Moreover, you aren't, Di Wuqing Ro said slowly. I have been under a lot of pressure these past few days. I have already thought about the ending of the lower 3 heavens. It will be over in about 10 chapters. But I am still racking my brain for the entry point of the lower 3 heavens. On one hand, it is ending. On the other hand, it is beginning. But I have to fulfill my promise. I have to do my best to write every chapter. I have to do my best to make every important character leave a deep impression in everyone's mind. That will be my proudest thing. It will also be my greatest success. And I want to be proud of it. So I can't be careless. And Di Wuqing Ro is a wise man. He can't let him end things carelessly. Even if he has to change his position, he must do it beautifully. Di Wuqing Ro has been dreaming of these past few days, very sad. I don't have anything to do today. I finished writing in advance. But I want to go out and relax. So, I took the initiative to invite a classmate for a drink to relieve the pressure. I am shamelessly asking everyone for votes. Monthly votes, recommendation votes, and evaluation votes. Of course, there are also subscriptions. I hope that capable brothers and sisters can support me. Of course, this is only if you think that this book is worthy of your subscription support. Haha. Chapter 400. Zhang calmly asked. But how can you be sure that Tai Longqing will fall into your trap? Tai Longqing is the #1 general of the continent. But he has been suppressed by me for more than 10 years. In these 10 years, I wanted him to win, and he won. I wanted him to lose, and he lost. Di Wuqing Ro smiled and said, Wouldn't you feel aggrieved if you were in my place? Wouldn't you want revenge? I would, Chu Yang replied affirmatively. No one wouldn't feel aggrieved about this matter. For a famous general who could be called a genius commander, it was an even more deep-rooted humiliation. Therefore, Tai Longqing has an inner demon. He wants to defeat me, Di Wuqing Ro, fair and square. But he also knows that it's as difficult as ascending to heaven to take revenge against me. Therefore, he desires this heaven-sent opportunity more than anyone else. But he is more hesitant than anyone else. That's because he is afraid of a trap. And that's because he knows how powerful I am. And he needs someone to affirm his pursuit plan at this time. And Tai Longqing only needs this affirmation. Di Wuqing Ro continued. Tai Longqing can turn his hesitation into determination as long as he has this affirmation. Di Wuqing Ro smiled and raised 3 fingers. And I have 3 people by Tai Longqing's side who are willing to speak for me. Wu Qian and Xu Yang sucked in a cold breath at the same time. The generals of Iron Cloud have followed Tai Longqing for many years. And they have been suppressed by me. Therefore, they will swarm forward as long as someone affirms. This is their mentality. They thirst for revenge. They thirst for meritorious service. They thirst to change the current situation. They thirst to defeat Di Wuqing Ro. But your identity is special. Tai Longqing must ask for your opinion even if he is absolutely certain about his pursuit plan. Therefore, Tai Longqing immediately sent you a message after he analyzed my intentions. And you are the only person on this battlefield who can stay out of it. In other words, you are the only onlooker. As the saying goes, the onlooker sees everything clearly. Therefore, I firmly believe that you can see through my plan. Therefore, I came in right after Tai Longqing's messenger delivered the letter. Di Wuqingro smiled. This time, I came in and delayed you for 4 hours. On the other side, Tai Longqing has been waiting for your news under the urging of everyone. So, he must have thought that you've acquiesced. Sometimes, he can't wait to chase after you. That's because he doesn't know when he will miss the opportunity. Therefore, it is inevitable for the army to set out. Di Wuqingro insipidly said, This is my tailor-made revenge plan for Tai Longqing. It is also the best opportunity for Iron Cloud to dominate the world. He will definitely seize it, and will not miss it. He would rather take the risk than miss it. That's why my plan succeeded so easily. Di Wuqingro leisurely stood up. Minister Chu, you must guard against the Golden Horse Riders Department. Of course, I believe that you've already made preparations. Jing Menghun is nothing more than a clown in your hands. Then, he put on his mask, and floated out with his thin body as if he was weightless. Minister Chu, I owe you a favor. I will return it to you if I am lucky enough to meet you in the upper 3 heavens tomorrow. Farewell. The mountains are high and the rivers are long. You and I will meet again. Di Wuqingro's last words drifted in the distant wind. Chu Yang, what should we do? Wu Qian anxiously asked. Chu Yang remained silent. He floated out, and arrived next to the flagpole. Then he floated up. He saw that the distant mountain had already been set ablaze. He calmed down and slowly said, 8 million troops have been thrown into the battlefield. The only thing we can do now is to wait and see. He paused for a moment and said, Order the army to advance 50 miles. Wait for my orders at any time. Get ready to respond to any situation. Yes. Wu Kuangyun. Yes. The selected elite troops, the troops of Butian Pavilion, and the experts of Beyond the Heavens sect are to form an army. They will be independent of the 300,000 troops. Wait for my orders at any time. Yes. Wu Kuangyun had been waiting for a long time. The war had already broken out. This hot-blooded general couldn't wait any longer. He heard Chu Yang's order, and immediately blew the bugle horn. The 300,000 troops rumbled as they set off. The collision between Butian Pavilion and Golden Horse Riders Department was about to begin. Suddenly, a series of loud explosions resounded on the distant mountain. Flames soared to the sky. Half of the sky was illuminated in red. Chu Yang's heart was heavy. After all, these were the lives of 8 million people. However, Chu Yang's heart gradually calmed down as his warhorse moved forward step by step. He became cold and calm, without a single ripple. This is a calamity. And this calamity has already begun. So I have to bemoan the state of the universe and pity the fate of mankind. That's all. I have to accept it. And I have to overcome it. The 300,000 troops were like a sharp arrow as they shot towards the sky. Tai Longqing immediately summoned the generals for a discussion after he had sent the letter. However, the generals unanimously decided to attack. Their faces were flushed with anger. Their fighting spirit was overflowing. They had been oppressed by Di Wuqingro for so long. So, how could they let go of such a heaven-sent opportunity? Tai Butian was distraught at the moment. Her entire mind was troubled by another matter. So, she didn't think much about it. She quickly replied, Uncle Wan can make the decision. I will command the army to follow. Tai Butian's affirmation made Tai Longqing heave a sigh of relief. His fighting spirit blazed even brighter. However, King of Hell Chu's news still hadn't arrived. Time passed little by little. The enemy had retreated. But there was still no news from King of Hell Chu. Supreme Commander! We can't wait any longer. We will lose the opportunity soon, the generals demanded. Perhaps Minister Chu has already made preparations. Otherwise, he would have already spoken out to stop us, an advisor said. Tai Longqing raised his eyebrows in anger. He finally made up his mind. Then, he waved his big hand. Mobilize the entire army. Chase and defeat Di Wuqingro. Sky-shaking cheers resounded. A biting cold fighting spirit ignited in the night sky with a loud rumble. The urgent sound of the bugle horn resounded in every military camp. Then, a team of vanguard cavalry rushed out of the camp like angry dragons. They then rushed into the darkness ahead. The thunder-like sound of horse hooves continued to rumble as they rushed into the darkness. Then, more than 1,000,000 soldiers rushed out like a tide. The rumbling sound of horse hooves shook the earth. Tai Butian's troops followed behind Tai Longcheng's army, and rushed towards Great Zhao's camp. Millions of people moved at the same time. This momentum was earth-shattering. Tai Longcheng's army broke into Great Zhao's camp without any hindrance. Then they looked around, and found that most of the troops had disappeared without a trace except for a few wounded soldiers. Great Zhao's army had already occupied Iron Cloud Camp by the time Tai Longcheng had rushed in. Reporting to Supreme Commander. The camp is empty. The cavalry commander who had rushed in first quickly came forward to report. In fact, it wasn't empty. Those wounded soldiers had been slaughtered under his orders. They had been chopped like vegetables. No one? Did we arrive too late? Tai Longcheng frowned. Quickly inquire! Reporting to Supreme Commander, Great Zhao's army has retreated to the back of the mountain. Some troops haven't been able to cross the mountainous area in time. So they are hurrying on with their journey, the mounted scout reported. Chase! Tai Longcheng made a prompt decision. Then, the cavalry rushed up the mountain like a tide. Tai Longcheng's cavalry continued to chase after Great Zhao's camp. Tai Longcheng's reinforcements entered Great Zhao's camp. Tai Butian's vanguard troops also arrived outside the camp. At this time, suddenly, the sound of horns resounded from the mountaintops in all directions. Then, a large number of Great Zhao's cavalrymen rushed down from the mountaintops with a loud rumbling sound. They drew their bows and knocked their arrows halfway down, and aimed at the sky. Shoot! Hundreds of thousands of arrows were shot at the same time. The whooshing sound was so loud that it hurt people's eardrums. The densely packed arrows flew into the sky. The sky looked as if it had been dyed with ink. Ambush? Tai Longcheng sneered. How could he not expect an ambush since he had come to chase after them? Great Zhao's army stabilized their footing after a brief moment of panic. Then, they looked for cover on the mountain walls. Simultaneously, their formation changed into a defensive one. Diwuqing Ro, I've been prepared for this move of yours. Tai Longcheng laughed loudly. Kill! Countless Great Zhao's cavalry rushed down from the mountaintop with a loud roar. Tai Longcheng's complexion changed. His eyes shone with an incredulous light. Decisive battle? He had expected that Diwuqing Ro might have set up an ambush. But he hadn't expected that Diwuqing Ro would choose to launch a decisive battle at this time after abandoning all his military supplies. The Great Zhao's army was swarming in like a swarm. It was clear that the entire army was involved in this battle. The vanguard cavalry of the two countries collided with each other in the blink of an eye. Everyone pulled out their sabers at the same time. The entire dark sky was illuminated by the flashing saber lights. Then, their faces turned ferocious as they roared. Then, they spurred their horses and rushed into the enemy's ranks. The two groups of cavalry were advancing in a frenzy. It was unknown whether they were friends or foes. They fell off their horses and got trampled into meat paste. But no one cared. There was only one thought in everyone's heart: kill the enemy. Rush out of the enemy's big formation, and pierce through it. Then, turn around and kill. Kill! Hundreds of thousands of people shouted at the same time. It seemed as if the blue sky had been scared out of its wits. A ray of light appeared on the horizon at this moment. The neighing of the warhorses, the screams, the roars, and the sounds of collisions resounded. The vanguard cavalry of Iron Cloud had rushed into the belly of Great Zhao's cavalry. And Great Zhao's cavalry had also rushed into the middle of Iron Cloud's cavalry. There was no strategy to speak of at this moment. There was only killing, killing, killing. All the so-called martial arts techniques were completely useless in this kind of battle. Heads soared to the sky unceasingly. Severed limbs were flying in the sky unceasingly. Warhorses were falling down unceasingly. Dozens of people were losing their lives every minute and every second. Everyone had fallen into a frenzy. This was a crazy war. Chapter 401. Countless banners fluttered in the wind and whistled as they rushed into the battlefield. Millions of soldiers roared as they rushed into the battlefield. Great Zhao's military camp had turned into a battlefield. More than 1,000,000 people were fighting with each other. They were wielding their swords and slashing at each other. Suddenly, there was a flash of fire. Suddenly, the entire military camp was filled with electric sparks. Then, there was a loud rumbling sound, and an earth-shattering explosion suddenly erupted in the heart of Great Zhao's military camp. The violent explosion had blown a hole of several hundred feet in the heart of the camp. Everyone in the heart of the camp, regardless of whether they were friends or foes, regardless of their rank, was blown up into the sky and scattered into pieces of flesh. Then, the entire military camp suddenly caught on fire. The fire was raging and quickly spread. It had spread over 500 miles in the blink of an eye. Moreover, it was still rapidly expanding to the surroundings. Bursts of yellow smoke and black fog soared into the sky, and rapidly spread over the entire battlefield in this windless and cloudless weather. This smoke was obviously added with something. Everyone who smelled the yellow smoke felt dizzy. Moreover, their minds seemed to have fallen into an inexplicable confusion. They screamed wildly, and waved their swords madly. They didn't care if they were friends or foes, and started to fight in a chaotic manner. The black smoke rose and spread. Everyone who smelled it felt powerless. It seemed that they couldn't even control their eyelids. Their weapons fell to the ground with a clang sound. They could only look at the enemy's snow-white swords with a terrified look on their faces as they slashed at their bodies. The green smoke rolled and rose. Everyone who smelled it felt excited. It seemed as if their bodies had suddenly become congested with blood. They used their inexhaustible strength and roared as they slashed at their enemies. The thick purple smoke blew out. Everyone who smelled it felt as if they were in a dreamland. Moreover, the blood vessels in their bodies surged. They suddenly lifted their tents and found themselves surrounded by beautiful women. They couldn't help but shout excitedly and pounce on them like perverts. Obscene laughter, strange cries, and screams of struggle, these sounds were unbearable to the eyes. These things turned out to be all kinds of drugs that the Golden Horse Riders Department had spent more than 10 years to collect. Some of them were smokes that could make people feel powerless. Some were poisons, and some were aphrodisiacs. All in all, there were all kinds of poisonous smokes that could make people lose their bearings here. Furthermore, as it burned, it continued to emit, and there was more and more poisonous smoke, and as it rose, it kept drifting towards the mountains. However, it was blocked by the bandits and drifted back, continuing to cover the sky above the battlefield. It was as if there was a huge magnet here that kept the poisonous smoke from drifting away. Towards the end of the war, there was no organization and discipline. Everyone was killing based on their instincts. Whether it was the generals or the soldiers, they had all fallen into a state of confusion. Inside Diwu Qingrou's tent, Jing Menghun was fully clothed. He was counting the time. Finally, he stood up and shouted, "It's time for us to move out." All members of the Golden Horse Riders Department were to assemble and attack. Target, King of Hell Chu. Yes. Everyone replied in unison. Jing Menghun was about to stride out when someone suddenly shouted angrily from outside. How can this be? I want to see the Prime Minister. I want to see the Prime Minister. It was the general of the Heavenly Dragon, Yu Han. He had rushed inside while speaking. He bumped into Jing Menghun. King-level expert Jing, where's the Prime Minister? The Prime Minister isn't here. If you have something to say, tell me. Jing Menghun replied coldly. What's going on? Yu Han angrily pointed at the chaotic battlefield at the foot of the mountain. His eyes were bloodshot. What kind of a shameful way of fighting is this? General Yu, what are you talking about? Jing Menghun looked at him with dissatisfaction. I only want to ask, who gave the order to blow up the camp? Yuhan asked with grief and indignation. It was me! Jing Menghun gave the order. The Golden Horse Riders Department carried it out. What's wrong? Jing Menghun snorted and asked. What's wrong? Yuhan roared in anger. Suddenly he grabbed Jing Menghun's lapel. He clenched his teeth and asked, Why? Why did you do this? This is the Prime Minister's order. You can ask Prime Minister Diwu if you have any doubts. Jing Menghun looked at Yuhan's hand and said in an ice-cold voice, Let go! Bastard! Yuhan was extremely indignant. He suddenly slapped Jing Menghun's face and said angrily, You could have detonated the explosives ahead of time. That way, Iron Cloud would have borne the brunt of the explosion and the smoke. Why did you have to detonate the explosives after our people had rushed in? This is a crime! Yuhan screamed in grief and indignation. Iron Cloud is finished! But we're also finished. Do you know that? You son of a bitch, those are my brothers! My soldiers! My soldiers! Jing Menghun reached out his hand and stroked the place where he had been slapped. His eyes were like an eagle's. They contained suppressed anger and a faint murderous intention. General you don't have the right to speak in this matter. I, Jing Menghun, have a good grasp of the timing. It was also the Prime Minister's arrangement. Now you let go! I won't haggle over the fact that you slapped me. Yuhan angrily shouted. I slapped you? Bastard! Even if I cut you to pieces, it won't be enough to compensate for your heinous crimes. This is murder. This is a deliberate rebellion. I want to see the Prime Minister. I want to see Diwu Qingro. The murderous intention in Jing Menghun's eyes grew more and more intense. General Yu, there are some things that you can't say. Yuhan pulled out his sword with a clang sound. Then, he crazily rushed towards Jing Menghun and slashed at him. He cursed, You executioner, you and Diwu Qingro are executioners. Suddenly, Jing Menghun reached out and grabbed his neck. He lifted his tall and sturdy body up. He clenched his teeth and fiercely said, Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? Your soldiers? Can't your soldiers be killed? Don't tell me you have a lot of face? Do you believe that I won't kill you as well? Yuhan struggled with all his might. You dare! Kill me if you have the guts. If you don't kill me, Jing Menghun, I will. Suddenly, a kacha sound was heard. Yuhan's neck was bent to one side. Blood was flowing out from the corner of his mouth. He looked at Jing Menghun in disbelief. Then, the light in his eyes slowly disappeared. Only a pair of stiff eyes were left. They were full of anger and hatred. Unexpectedly, Jing Menghun had already broken his neck. Everyone in the tent suddenly cried out in alarm. Then, they became dumbstruck. Jing Menghun has beaten a general to death? You're overestimating your capabilities. Jing Menghun coldly snorted. He casually tossed Yuhan's corpse far away and said, Follow me. We're going to kill King of Hell Chu. The news of Yuhan's death at the hands of the Iron Cloud's assassins soon spread throughout the Great Zhao's barracks. Yuhan's 100,000-strong army was the only unit that Diwu Qingro had left behind to bring up the rear. Moreover, Yuhan was a man of virtue and prestige. He loved his soldiers very much. So, he had always been supported by the soldiers. Now that Yuhan had died, the army had no leader. So, it had become even more chaotic. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers wept at the same time. Take revenge for the great commander. Kill all of those Iron Cloud bastards. Someone suddenly yelled out crazily with tears streaming down his face. Go! Kill those bastards. Dozens of people galloped out of the ranks on their horses. They then rushed towards the battlefield in a frenzy. Take revenge for the great commander. A rumbling sound was heard. Thousands of people rushed out in a frenzy. Rush up! Tears streamed down the deputy general's face as he clenched his teeth. Kill them ruthlessly. A rumbling sound was heard as the 100,000-strong army rushed up the hillside. Then, they rushed down like a sudden waterfall. The 30,000-strong cavalry of the Golden Horse Riders Department also rushed in another direction as these people rushed down the hillside. The hilltop had been densely packed with people a moment ago, but it had become empty now. A cool breeze blew, and a burst of thick smoke drifted over and covered the hilltop. The thick smoke dispersed, and a black-robed figure appeared on the hilltop. He looked down at the battlefield in full swing, and heard the earth-shaking battle cries. Diwu-Ching-ro crossed his hands behind his back. His eyes were calm and gentle as he looked down. It was as if the bloody tragedy below had nothing to do with him. His black robe was fluttering in the wind. Diwu-Ching-ro's beard was also gently fluttering. His face was calm and cool. He looked like an immortal. He looked like this for a long time. Then, he gently sighed. He took out an invisible mound from his bosom and placed it on his palm. He stared at it for a long time. Then, he opened his palm and softly said, "Go." The invisible mound flapped its wings and flew up with a flapping sound. It circled in the air, and then disappeared without a trace, as if it had melted into the air. This was a message for Yinwu Fa, Yinwu Tian, and the others who were guarding the great Zhao Prefecture's capital. Diwu-Ching-ro had only written a few sentences on the message that the invisible mound had carried. Wash the prefecture with blood. Exterminate the imperial clan. Then, Diwu-Ching-ro's seal appeared. Diwu-Ching-ro faintly smiled as he looked at the disappearance of the invisible mound. He looked in Chu Yang's direction, and softly said in his heart, "King of Hell Chu, I owe you. But don't forget that you also owe me. You and I will meet again in the upper three heavens. At that time, ha ha!" Then, he took a deep breath, and looked at the battlefield. Then, he turned his head, and looked at the direction of the great Zhao Prefecture. There was reluctance and unwillingness in his eyes. But, he didn't say anything in the end. He just let out a long sigh. After a long time, Diwu-Ching-ro spoke in a sad and low voice. It seemed as if he was talking in a dream. "The lower three heavens is over? I'm afraid that I, Diwu-Ching-ro, will never return to this place in this lifetime." The sky was getting brighter and brighter. The morning wind was also gradually blowing. It was getting stronger and stronger. The poisonous smoke that had originally shrouded the battlefield seemed to have completed its mission. It began to slowly drift away. The poisonous smoke was disappearing faster and faster along with the sound of the wind. A gust of wind came, and the smoke rushed to the summit. It shrouded Diwu-Ching-ro's thin figure. The thick smoke dispersed, and Diwu-Ching-ro's figure disappeared without a trace. Chapter 402. The situation of the battle became even more chaotic. Yu Han's army rushed in, and a part of them got drugged by the poisonous smoke. These people were already extremely sad and indignant. So, they became even more berserk. It seemed as if millions of people had lost their minds, and were fiercely rushing in to kill. Tai Butian had also rushed in with Shadow and the army in the beginning. But she had felt that something was wrong when she had discovered that the poisonous smoke was rising everywhere. So, the two shadows had risked their lives to rescue Tai Butian. Thick smoke floated in the air. People had lost their minds, and had rushed into the battlefield. However, Tai Butian and the two shadows were safe and sound. Tai Butian's chest would flash with a hazy radiance every time the thick smoke floated over. And her body would be shrouded in this radiance. Shadow was also doing the same. The three of them were flabbergasted. But they later discovered that the mysterious Yang Jade had taken effect. This piece of mysterious Yang Jade had such a function. Everything was fine after they had withdrawn from the battlefield. However, the bloody smell that had soared to the sky still made Tai Butian uncomfortable. Her complexion had turned pale, and she felt nauseous in her chest. She retched several times. Then, she walked a little further away. Then, she finally calmed down. Shadow looked at Tai Butian with a strange and worried look in his eyes. Only several tens of thousands of people had followed Tai Butian to protect her. The battlefield wasn't far away. So, it wouldn't take long for them to rush over here. However, Tai Butian was the most important person in the battlefield. Even millions of soldiers of Great Zhao's army didn't look in her direction. Tai Butian calmed herself down. Then, she focused her eyes on the battlefield. She looked at the surrounding terrain, and suddenly realized something. A look of deep worry and unbearable worry appeared on her face. Diwu Qingro had set up the 7 Killings Great Array with his own camp and this mountain as the dragon's spine. This Diwu Qingro is very vicious. 7 Killings Great Array? Shadow was puzzled. The 7 Slaughters Array, as its name suggests, is the most ferocious killing array. It needs the power of living beings to activate it. The more people die in this array, the greater the power of the array. Moreover, Diwu Qingro had arranged so many drugs inside. So, it made it even more difficult for people to retreat. In the end, the entire army was wiped out. Tai Butian's complexion changed as he said this. Shadow, you enter the array immediately. Tell Uncle Wang to withdraw immediately. As for the rest of the soldiers, withdraw as many as you can. The formation has already been completed. If we continue to stay here, we will only lose our lives. Ing nodded and leaped up, turning into a stream of light and rushing into the army formation. Tai Butian watched worriedly. Suddenly, he let out a huge sigh. The lives of 8 million people. Diwu Qingru, what exactly are you trying to do? Why did you make such a crazy decision? Right now, Tai Butian naturally didn't know that Diwu Qingru had already left this place. That green robe that had once awed the entire lower 3 heavens had already drifted to a faraway place. After a long time, Ing rushed out with a person on his back. His entire body was bathed in blood. He was Tai Longqing, a famous general of his generation. However, he had already fainted. What's wrong? Tai Butian was shocked. I was the one who knocked him out. Ing laughed dryly. He was also charmed. That's good. Tai Butian let out a sigh of relief. Then, he looked in another direction. Why haven't we seen Minister Chu's troops yet? Minister Chu is extremely intelligent. He has foresight. I'm afraid that he has anticipated this situation here. That's why he hasn't moved. However, I'm afraid that our Iron Cloud's most elite military strength is only left with Minister Chu's 300,000 troops. Ing sighed. Tai Butian's eyes flashed with a trace of comfort and pride. Then, he insipidly said, Minister Chu always makes people feel at ease. Ing and Ing looked at each other. They both saw a trace of different emotions in each other's eyes. Suddenly, the sound of hoofbeats was heard. A group of cavalry rushed over like a whirlwind. The leader shouted, We are Minister Chu. May I ask if His Majesty is well? His Majesty is well. What's the situation on Minister Chu's side? Ing replied loudly. Minister Chu is in a confrontation with the Golden Horse Riders Department. Minister Chu said that he will try his best to deal with the Golden Horse Riders Department. As long as His Majesty is well, this war is already won. That person replied loudly. Minister Chu, take care of yourself. Tai Butian replied loudly. Yes. This subordinate will remember. The person who had arrived suddenly pulled the reins of his horse. The horse neighed, and suddenly changed direction. It turned around, and rushed back the way it had come. Minister Chu is indeed a conscientious person, Ing said meaningfully. Tai Butian's eyes revealed a trace of sweetness. But he understood in his heart, Chu Yang must have known about the situation here. That's why he's concerned about my safety. It's just as he said, everyone is inside the 7 Killings Great Array. Even if there are survivors, there won't be many of them. As for Iron Cloud, it's a victory as long as I'm still alive. That's because I still have Chu Yang's 300,000 troops. And Diwu Qingro has already thrown all his troops into the battle. Meanwhile, Chu Yang's Iron Bucket Formation was in a confrontation with the Golden Horse Riders Department's cavalry. Chu Yang wouldn't rashly start a decisive battle before Tai Butian's news came back. This made Jing Menghun very sullen. King of Hell Chu! Jing Menghun roared. Come and fight me to the death! Chu Yang ignored him. Eventually, the messenger rushed back. He brought back the news that Chu Yang had been longing for. His Majesty is well! Chu Yang felt relieved. But Ian is well. So, the only thing left is to deal with the Golden Horse Riders Department. I believe that there won't be any other forces as long as I get rid of the Golden Horse Riders Department. Are you ready? Chu Yang asked. I'm ready! Wu Kuangyan's face flushed with excitement. I can finally move unhindered on the battlefield. He had been holding back for a long time because he couldn't personally go into battle. I'm not asking you. Chu Yang looked at Chen Yutong and the others. I'm ready, Cheng Ang said loudly. What about me? Wu Kuangyan stared blankly and asked anxiously. You take the army and go to help His Majesty. You're needed there. As for the Golden Horse Riders Department, leave it to me. Chu Yang's eyes flashed with a trace of complex emotions when he said the words His Majesty. Chu Yang naturally had a plan to deal with the Golden Horse Riders Department. But he knew some things that he hadn't known before because of his plan. Chu Yang's plan was poison. Give them a taste of their own medicine. He had specially studied the nearby terrain for this purpose. And he had finally set his target at a small lake 350 kilometers away. Chu Yang's plan was to turn the entire lake into poisonous water. Then, he would lure the Golden Horse Riders Department there. This would cause Jing Menghun to lose a lot of his military strength. Then, he would use this method one after another. And, he would be able to wear down Jing Menghun no matter what he did. Chu Yang didn't even think about a frontal battle. Chu Yang and the troops he led were just bait. Tai Longqing was full of resentment towards Di Wuqingro. Therefore, he would do anything to defeat Di Wuqingro. Jing Menghun was also full of resentment towards King Ran of Chu. In fact, it was an irreconcilable hatred. Jing Menghun would kill Chu Yang as long as he had the opportunity. Therefore, Di Wuqingro had specifically assigned Jing Menghun to Chu Yang. He had given Jing Menghun a mission: kill King of Hell Chu. You don't have to worry about anything else. You just have to lead the Golden Horse Riders Department and kill King of Hell Chu. Jing Menghun had received such an order. However, it was also in line with Chu Yang's thoughts. Chu Yang had naturally thought of using the poisonous flood dragon's poison when he had chosen the poison to use. However, the sword spirit had firmly stopped him. That was because the poisonous flood dragon's poison would have been poisonous for countless years if he had used it. Who knew how many people would have died if that had happened? Moreover, many of Jing Menghun's subordinates had already lost their lives to the poisonous flood dragon's poison. Therefore, the sword spirit had recommended another poison to Chu Yang. You can use the lust flood dragon's poison. It's much better than the poisonous flood dragon's poison. Lust flood dragon? Chu Yang asked blankly. What's a lust flood dragon? This sentence made the sword spirit widen his eyes. It can't be, right? You've been poisoned by the lust flood dragon's aphrodisiac. But you're still saying that you don't know? How did you get rid of it? I've been poisoned by the aphrodisiac? Chu Yang was even more at a loss. Do you remember that you had encountered two big snakes when you had met Jing Menghun in the last stage of your escape? One of them had fiercely blown a puff of pink smoke at you. The sword spirit was helpless. How can this guy not know anything? Chu Yang suddenly remembered when the sword spirit said this. Yes, there was such a thing. That was the lust flood dragon, the sword spirit said. He then explained the characteristics of the lust flood dragon. The more he explained, the bigger Chu Yang's mouth opened. In the end, he was dumbstruck like a wooden chicken. You're thinking that I've been poisoned? Chu Yang asked in a daze. Yes, the sword spirit affirmed. You mean that there's no other way to get rid of this aphrodisiac apart from sexual intercourse? The five of them would have taken advantage of this opportunity to fester and die. Chu Yang asked while stammering. Exactly, the sword spirit affirmed again. But why didn't I die? Chu Yang's eyes were lifeless. His forehead was covered in cold sweat. How do I know? I was also unconscious at that time, The sword spirit replied in a discontented manner. Is there really no other way? Chu Yang wanted to cry. Doesn't that mean that my pure and spotless body, I don't have any chastity? Cough, cough, cough. But the problem is, who opened the bud for me? I couldn't do anything even if I was awake. I could have suppressed the aphrodisiac at most, and prolonged it for a while. But it would have eventually been resolved through this channel. The sword spirit helplessly said. Xu Yang sat down. His face was pale. The sword spirit reminded him. So, there must have been a woman who had sex with you. Chu Yang covered his face. But, who was that? He remembered that Tai Butian was a man, and there were two shadows. Could it be shadows? Chu Yang shuddered as he recalled the rigid face of the female shadow. But then, he concluded that it wasn't the case. If that's the case, there must have been some traces. Moreover, her husband was beside her. That's even more impossible. But who was this woman who did that to me? Chapter 403. Minister Chu was in extreme pain. I lost my virginity unknowingly, and didn't feel anything? Moreover, I don't know who that woman is. I don't even know what she looks like. Is there anything more speechless for a man in the world than this? Is there anything more depressing than this? No matter who it is, Tai Butian definitely knows about it, said the sword spirit. Sigh. Chu Yang heaved a deep sigh. Suddenly, a feeling of suffocation rose in his heart. Tai Butian, you know everything, but you don't say anything? What's going on? Are you playing with me? After suffocation came anger. But there was also undeniable gratitude. It doesn't matter who that woman is. I'm under the influence of the aphrodisiac. But I don't know anything. And I let the other party take the initiative. This is extremely difficult for any woman. Moreover, I have to bear a lot of pain. Because, according to Sword Spirit, my purity is very high. So, an ordinary woman can't bear it. The other party is my savior. But I don't even know who my savior is. Chu Yang remained silent. He really wanted to go to Tai Butian and ask her what was going on. But this was a critical moment. He could only wait until after the war. Chu Yang heaved a long sigh. He eventually adopted Sword Spirit's method: create a pool of spring water with the inner core of the lust dragon. First, this poison was more tyrannical than the poison of the poisonous flood dragon. Moreover, it was colorless and tasteless. Moreover, it was convenient. One only needed to throw the inner core into it. The most important thing was, the pool of green water would return to its original state after 3 days of evaporation. The efficacy of the poison would disappear completely. So, there was no need to worry. Therefore, Chu Yang had taken out the 2 inner cores a few hours ago, and hid them in the pool of water. Chu Yang saw that Jing Menghun was still strutting around after he received the news that Tai Butian was safe and sound. He couldn't help but get angry. Motherfucker, I'm depressed. But you bastards still came here to make a fuss. Wu Qian! You follow Wu Kuanyun. Leave this to me. Chu Yang's face was cold. Chu Yang, leave this to me, Wu Qian said calmly. Chu Yang turned his head to look, and saw that Wu Qian's attire was the same as his. A black robe completely covered her body. She only needed to wear a mask, and she would be a living king of Hell Chu. What are you doing? Chu Yang's face turned cold. I will be the bait for you. Wu Qian's eyes were filled with determination. Everyone knew that this battle against the Golden Horse Riders Department was a battle with a huge disparity in terms of ratio. The 30,000-strong army of the Golden Horse Riders Department couldn't be compared to this motley crew that Chu Yang had temporarily assembled. The danger of this battle far exceeded the slaughter of millions of soldiers. Moreover, Jing Menghun, a Peking-level expert, was personally leading the team. There were also dozens of lower-grade revered martial artists. The weakest one was a martial master. Even an emperor-level expert could lose his life if he wasn't careful. Wu Qian was very pessimistic. However, there was one thing that she had to do. Even if I have to die a horrible death, nothing must happen to Chu Yang. Therefore, Wu Qianqian had already prepared herself. I will replace Chu Yang and fight with Jing Menghan's people. I will take them to the pond when they are unable to endure the repeated battles. It would be good if they could come back alive. But Chu Yang would still be alive if they died in this battle. Even if they continued to deal with the Golden Horse Riders Department, they would be weakened by at least half of their strength. It would be much easier for Chu Yang to deal with them. Wu Kuangyun had already begun to lead his troops when she saw that the three armies were ready. Wu Qianqian clamped her legs together and was about to rush out. Her hand reached into her bosom and was about to take out the mask to wear. Even if I die, my love won't be in vain if I die like this. No! Chu Yang grabbed her and looked into her eyes with a stern look. I beg you! Wu Qianqian whispered. But her voice was firm as she said, I beg you! You don't have to go. I will go! I beg you! Chu Yang's mind was shaken. He suddenly became absent-minded and thought of Mo Qing Wu. Back then, Qing Wu was the same. No matter what, she would rather be injured and die than let him get hurt. Everything she did was for him. Chu Yang groaned in pain. He suddenly opened his eyes. Qian, I beg you! Don't do this! He closed his eyes and restrained his surging emotions. Then, he said in a low voice, I already owe a woman my whole life. I don't want to owe another woman my whole life. Then, he suddenly pointed his finger at Wu Qianqian's chest. Wu Qianqian was caught off guard. She didn't have enough time to defend herself. Her body swayed, and she fell into Chu Yang's arms. But her beautiful eyes were wide open. Her face was full of anxiety. Her eyes were full of pleading, Let me go! Let me go! Wu Kuangyun! Chu Yang shouted. Your subordinate is here! Miss Wu is injured. Take her to His Majesty's place to recuperate. Chu Yang ordered. Yes. Wu Kuangyun immediately arranged a carriage. Chu Yang held Wu Qianqian and gently placed her inside. Wu Qianqian looked at him foolishly. Chu Yang hardened his heart and turned around to leave. Wu Qianqian's tears finally flowed down silently. She looked at Chu Yang's back as he strode away. Her heart was filled with endless sorrow. Chu Yang, you already owe a woman your whole life. So, you have to repay her in this life. So, you don't want to owe me your whole life. But you know what? You know what? You've already owed me. You've already owed me your whole life. Even though I won't ask you for it, but you really owe me. Wu Qianqian silently shed tears. The carriage swayed and slowly started to move. Chu Yang restrained the Golden Horse Riders Department so that Tai Butian could quickly take care of the battlefield and secure the victory. Who was more important and who was less important? Minister Chu turned around and looked up to the sky. He shouted, Everyone, get ready! 30,000 elites roared like a tsunami. Ah! The Golden Horse Riders Department is on the other side. They are known as the most elite troops in the world. Are you afraid to face them? We're not afraid! Do you want to defeat the Golden Horse Riders Department? Chu Yang roared. What's the most powerful in the world? They're just bullshit in our eyes. The Golden Horse Riders Department is bullshit. They're worse than bullshit. 30,000 people raised their arms and shouted. Chu Yang laughed out loud. He spurred his horse forward and shouted, Jing Menghan, I'll give you a chance to fight a decisive battle. You and I have the same number of people. Do you dare to fight to the last man? Jing Menghan's eyes emitted a deep hatred. I swear I'll tear you to pieces as long as you don't run away. Ha ha ha! Chu Yang laughed strangely. He suddenly clamped his legs on the horse's belly and shouted, Chop these bastards into mincemeat! The sturdy horse issued a long neigh and fiercely rushed out. 30,000 people whistled behind him and rolled out like a gale. Jing Menghan exposed a cruel and evil grin on his face. He waved his hand. Kill! If you kill King of Hell Chu, you'll be promoted by 3 ranks, and you'll get 10,000 taels of gold. The Golden Horse Riders Department's iron-like army surged forward. They started slowly, and then sped up. They slowly formed a cruel torrent on the ground, and fiercely met Chu Yang's troops. Chu Yang let out a long and loud shout. He jumped up along with his horse. Then he shouted, "What harm is there in slaughtering the entire world?" He had used this move at this moment. The entire area was covered in blood. But he had gained a kind of enlightenment. It had become even more cruel and fierce. A bright swordlight soared high into the sky. It turned into an unstoppable fierce light. It rushed into the troops of the Golden Horse Riders Department at lightning speed, and went straight for Jing Menghun. Suddenly, a magnificent crown appeared in midair. This crown was golden red in color. It looked like the sun had risen in the sky. It was several times bigger than the crown of an ordinary king-level expert. Jing Menghun exclaimed, "A king-level expert? King of Hell Chu has broken through to the king-level expert in such a short time?" However, he didn't have time to wonder because Chu Yang's sword had already swept away the rain of blood. More than a dozen people screamed as they were cut into 2 halves. Chu Yang had arrived in front of Jing Menghun. "Come on!" Jing Menghun flew up from his horse's back. His sword energy shot out in a crisscross manner. He met Chu Yang's move head-on. What harm is there in slaughtering the entire world? Both of their bodies trembled with a loud bang. Jing Menghun borrowed the force of the collision to fly back. He was extremely distressed. "The sword that I've been using for decades has turned into a sawtooth." He then looked at Chu Yang. Chu Yang didn't care about his sword. He let out a long and loud shout, and rushed forward again. Jing Menghun felt a chill in his heart. He had felt that King of Hell Chu had made great progress every time he had fought with him. This time, he was actually able to stand on equal footing with him, and not be at a disadvantage. Chu Yang had borrowed the power of the divine sword. Moreover, his sword moves were very mysterious. But it was still inconceivable that he could achieve this. Jing Menghun saw that Chu Yang's opponent was rushing over with an aggressive momentum. So, he fiercely dodged, and avoided Chu Yang's sharp sword. Then, he grabbed a big saber from one of his subordinates, and prepared to fight with Chu Yang again. However, he turned his head and saw that King of Hell Chu was ignoring him. Chu Yang had killed his way into the cavalry. Blood surged everywhere he went. And human heads rolled like watermelons. Chu Yang had rushed forward more than 200 feet in a flash. He had left behind nearly 100 mutilated corpses. Jing Menghun roared, and rushed over. Then, the 2 armies collided with each other. It seemed as if the heavenly thunder had ignited the earth's fire. Both sides were doing their utmost to kill each other. They were doing their utmost to advance. 2 people would often exchange a move. Then, they would pass by each other, and would be replaced by another opponent. Everyone was rushing forward with indomitable will. Chu Yang felt a bright light in front of him after a quarter of an hour. The pressure on his body had lightened. He had already broken through the rear of the enemy's cavalry. Only 18,000 of the 30,000 elites were left behind. And they followed Chu Yang as he rushed out. Jing Menghun let out a long and loud shout. He gathered his troops, and turned around at the fastest speed. He was ready to welcome the next round of battle. King-level expert Jing's confidence had greatly increased after this round of battle. The enemy has left behind at least 10,000 corpses in this battle. But my side has only paid the price of less than 5,000 people. We will soon be able to kill the enemy as long as we continue to fight like this. However, he was left dumbfounded when he turned around. King of Hell Chu had led his troops. He hadn't turned around. He had rushed in the opposite direction like a wisp of smoke. And he had left behind billowing smoke on the ground. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.